The bomb detonates. 100 million degrees of apocalyptic fire rip through the Colosseum floor, and in that fractured instant the world becomes nothing but light. White. Blinding. Absolute. The kind of light that erases shadows, erases thought, erases everything that came before. Connor Kent is at ground zero. His hands are still wrapped around the casing. This monstrous cylinder of alien engineering, this gene bomb designed to erase an entire species from existence. Green Martians, millions of them, mothers, children, elders who have lived for centuries, all of them marked for extinction by a madman's hatred and a devil's bargain with apocalypse. Connor does not think. There is no time to think. There is only the instinct carved into him by years of battle, years of sacrifice, years of learning what it means to be a hero when the world never asked you to exist in the first place. He punches downward. His fists shatter rock. His body becomes a missile, driving the bomb deeper, and deeper into the red crust of Mars, away from the crowds, away from the Colosseum, away from her. The heat intensifies with every meter. Magma begins to glow beneath him, the liquid heart of an alien world churning and waiting. He can feel his skin beginning to burn. He can feel the Kryptonian DNA in his cells screaming for yellow sunlight that does not exist here, on a planet bathed in the cold glow of a distant star. But he does not stop. He cannot stop. Because somewhere above him, McGann is watching. McGann, who loved him when he was angry and confused and had no name. McGann, who saw past the rage and the fear and the terrible question that haunted him every day of his existence. Am I real? Am I enough? Do I deserve to be here? She answered yes, every day, with every touch, with every thought shared through their psychic link, that invisible thread that connected her mind to his, her heart to his, her very soul to his. And now that thread is about to snap, the bomb reaches critical mass. Connor feels it in his bones, a vibration that goes beyond sound, beyond sensation, beyond anything the human or Kryptonian body was designed to experience. The casing cracks, the light returns, and then there is nothing. Above, in the Colosseum, the ground shudders. McGann Moores, Miss Martian, the woman who crossed galaxies to find love, the white Martian who defied her people's prejudice to stand beside a clone from Earth, feels the psychic link sever. It does not fade, it doesn't flicker. It is torn from her mind like a limb ripped from a body. She screams. The sound is not human. It is not Martian. It is something older, something primal, a cry that echoes through the minds of every telepath on the planet. Green Martians clutch their heads. White Martians stagger. Even the stoic red Martians, sworn to neutrality, feel the shockwave of her grief ripple across the psychic plane. Connor is gone. The man she was going to marry in 3 days. The man who travelled across the stars to stand before her parents and ask for their blessing. The man who held her when she was ashamed of her true form, who told her she was beautiful when she could not believe it herself. The man who forgave her when she violated his mind, who stayed when he had every right to leave. Gone. She falls to her knees. The red dust of Mars stains her skin. Her hands claw at the ground, as if she could dig through the planet and pull him back, as if sheer will could undo what the bomb has done. But there is no body to recover. There is no heartbeat to find. There is only silence where once there was a voice that called her babe, that laughed at her terrible cooking, that whispered promises in the dark about a future they would build together. The Martian sky hangs low and rust-coloured above her. The twin moons watch without comment. Somewhere in the distance the authorities are scrambling, trying to understand the explosion, trying to contain the chaos, trying to make sense of the unthinkable. But McGann does not hear them. She hears only the absence, the void where Connor used to be. Beast Boy finds her there minutes later. Garfield Logan, the green-skinned shapeshifter who calls her Sis, who owes his powers to a blood transfusion she gave him years ago. He wraps his arms around her, and together they weep for the man who saved a world that was not his own. Who was he? That is the question that will haunt the heroes of Earth when the news arrives. That is the question that will be asked in Titan's Tower and the Hall of Justice, in Smallville and Metropolis, in the quiet corners where those who loved him tried to make sense of the loss. Who was Connor Kent? He was not supposed to exist. That is the first truth. the foundation upon which his entire life was built. He was a clone, grown in a tank designed to replace a god. When Superman fell to Doomsday, the scientists of Project Cadmus saw an opportunity. They would create a new Superman. Controllable Superman, a weapon wearing the face of hope. They failed. The Kryptonian DNA was too unstable. It could not be cloned directly. So they improvised. They took human cells and modified them, engineering a body that could simulate Superman's powers through a strange ability called tactile telekinesis. They aged him artificially, implanting knowledge directly into his brain. They dressed him in a suit and prepared to install fail-safes, programming that would ensure he could never defy his masters. But he broke free before they could finish. He burst into the daylight with a leather jacket on his back and no name to call his own. He called himself Superman because he did not know what else to be. He was arrogant and reckless and desperate for approval. He made mistakes. A pilot died because of his inexperience. He trusted the wrong people. He was captured, imprisoned, nearly destroyed, but he survived. He learned. He grew. And when the real Superman returned from death, the clone accepted the name Superboy, not as an insult, but as a beginning. He would earn his place. He would prove that he was more than the sum of his parts. He would become a hero not because he was programmed to, but because he chose to. That choice defined him. He joined Young Justice and found brothers in Tim Drake and Bart Allen. He joined the Teen Titans and found a family that transcended blood. He fell in love with Cassie Sandsmark, Wonder Girl, and learned what it meant to be vulnerable. He discovered that half his DNA came from Lex Luthor, Superman's greatest enemy, and he spent years terrified that he was destined to become a monster. He died once before. During a crisis that threatened to unravel the multiverse, he gave his life to stop a mad god wearing his own face. They built statues in his honor. They mourned him across two worlds, and then, against all odds, he came back. Resurrected in the 31st century, healed over 1,000 years, returned to a present that had moved on without him. He rebuilt his life. He found new purpose. He found McGann, and now he is gone again. Swallowed by fire on an alien world, his ashes scattered in the lava flows beneath the Martian surface. Or so they believe, because the truth is stranger. The truth is darker. The truth is that Connor Kent is not dead. Not entirely. In the instant before the explosion consumed him, something happened. Something impossible. Something that pulled him out of reality and into a dimension of shadows and silence, the Phantom Zone. And in that place beyond time, beyond hope, beyond reach, Connor Kent is about to discover that there are fates far worse than death. But that is a story for later. For now, we must go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the day Superman died, and a world desperate for hope turned to science to resurrect their fallen god. This is the story of a boy who was never supposed to be born, a clone who became a hero, a weapon who became a husband. This is the lore of Superboy. Metropolis burned. The city of tomorrow, that gleaming monument to human ambition, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and the future seemed to arrive daily in ribbons of chrome and glass, was being torn apart. Cars flew through the air like toys. Buildings crumbled into avalanches of concrete and steel. The streets themselves cracked and buckled as two titans clashed in a battle that defied comprehension. On one side stood Superman, Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, the man of steel. For decades he had been Earth's guardian, a being of impossible power who chose, again and again, to use that power in service of others. He could have conquered the world. He could have ruled it as a god. Instead, he saved cats from trees. He stopped bank robberies. He smiled at children and posed for photographs and made humanity believe, against all evidence, that the universe was fundamentally good. On the other side stood Doomsday. No one knew where the creature came from. It had no history, no origin story, no motivation beyond destruction. It was simply rage given form, a mountain of grey flesh and bone protrusions, eyes burning with mindless hatred, fists capable of shattering dimensions. It had torn its way across the American heartland, leaving a trail of devastation that stretched for hundreds of miles. The Justice League had tried to stop it. They failed. Green Lantern's constructs shattered like glass. The Flash was swatted aside like an insect. Even the Martian Manhunter, one of the most powerful beings on Earth, fell before the creature's relentless assault. Only Superman remained. The battle raged through the streets of Metropolis. Every punch landed with the force of a bomb. Every collision sent shockwaves rippling outward, shattering windows for blocks in every direction. Lois Lane watched from a distance, her heart in her throat, as the man she loved fought with everything he had. It was not enough. Doomsday was relentless. It did not tire. It did not hesitate. It absorbed punishment that would have killed any other being in the universe and kept coming. Superman's costume tore, his cape shredded. Blood, Kryptonian blood red as any human's, began to stain his chest. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Because behind him were the people of Metropolis, the children hiding in basements, the families huddled in shelters, the millions of souls who had no defense against this monster, except the man in blue. The final blow came at the steps of the Daily Planet. Superman and Doomsday struck each other simultaneously, two fists meeting with the force of colliding planets. The shockwave flattened everything within a quarter mile. When the dust settled, both combatants lay motionless on the ground. Doomsday was dead, and so was Superman. Lois reached him first. She cradled his broken body in her arms, her tears falling on his face as the light faded from his eyes. Around them the world watched in stunned silence. Cameras broadcast the image to every corner of the globe. The invincible man, the symbol of hope, the greatest hero the world had ever known, gone. The funeral was attended by millions. They came from every nation, every walk of life, every corner of the earth that Superman had touched. They lined the streets of Metropolis, holding candles, holding signs, holding each other. Presidents and kings stood beside factory workers and farmers. Enemies set aside their differences for a single day of mourning. Even Lex Luthor, Superman's greatest adversary, the man who had spent his life trying to destroy the Man of Steel, attended the ceremony with what appeared to be genuine grief. But behind that mask of sorrow, Luthor's mind was already calculating. Superman was dead. The body was secured. And somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of power that Luthor had spent decades constructing, an opportunity was taking shape. He was not the only one thinking such thoughts. Project Cadmus existed in the shadows. Officially, it was a government-funded research facility dedicated to the study of genetics and cloning. Unofficially, it was something far more ambitious, a laboratory where the boundaries of life itself were being rewritten. The facility sprawled beneath the streets of Metropolis, a subterranean city of sterile corridors and humming machines, staffed by scientists who had long ago abandoned conventional ethics in pursuit of their work. The director of Cadmus was a man named Paul Westfield. Westfield was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He had overseen the creation of dozens of experimental life forms, creatures grown in tanks, engineered for specific purposes, discarded when they failed to meet expectations, the Newsboy Legion, the DNA Leans, the Guardian himself, a clone of a Golden Age hero rebuilt to serve as Cadmus's enforcer. All of them were Westfield's creations, all of them were tools, and now Westfield saw the ultimate tool within his grasp. Superman's body had been recovered from the battlefield. Through channels that existed outside official records, Cadmus had acquired samples, blood, tissue, fragments of Kryptonian DNA. For the first time in history, humanity had the genetic blueprint of a god. Westfield intended to use it. The plan was simple in conception, staggering in ambition. Cadmus would clone Superman. They would create a replacement, a being with all of the original's power, but none of his independence. This new Superman would be loyal to Cadmus, controllable, a weapon that could be pointed at any enemy, deployed for any purpose, and recalled when its mission was complete. There was only one problem. Kryptonian DNA refused to cooperate. The double helix that encoded Superman's abilities was unlike anything terrestrial science had ever encountered. It was unstable, volatile, resistant to the cloning techniques that had worked on every other subject. Experiment after experiment failed. Embryos collapsed. Clones died within hours of activation. Westfield watched 12 attempts dissolve into nothing, his frustration mounting with each failure. It was during the 12th failure that a solution presented itself. Westfield's scientists had discovered something remarkable during their study of Superman's corpse. Surrounding the Kryptonian's body was an invisible field, a bioelectric aura that provided much of his invulnerability and flight capability. This aura operated through a form of self-directed telekinesis, allowing Superman to extend his protection to objects he touched. What if, the scientist reasoned, they could replicate this aura in a human subject? The plan shifted. Rather than creating a direct clone of Superman, Cadmus would engineer a human being, genetically modified to resemble the Kryptonian, enhanced to simulate his powers through what they termed tactile telekinesis. The subject would not truly be Superman, but to the world, he would be close enough. For the human DNA required to stabilize the clone, Westfield turned to an unlikely source, himself, or so he believed. In truth, the genetic material came from a far more dangerous donor, one whose involvement would remain hidden for years to come. Lex Luthor had his fingers in Cadmus. Through intermediaries and shell companies, through bribes and blackmail, he had ensured that his own DNA would be spliced into the clone's genetic code. The scientist believed they were using Westfield's cells. They were wrong. And Luthor smiled in his penthouse office, knowing that the weapon Cadmus was building would one day answer to him. Experiment 13 began. The clone grew in a tank of amniotic fluid, suspended in artificial twilight. He had no name, he had no memories, he had no experience of the world beyond the glass walls of his incubation chamber. But Cadmus was impatient. The world was crying out for Superman, and Westfield intended to deliver. The clone was artificially aged, his body accelerated through adolescence until he possessed the appearance of a teenager, perhaps 15 or 16 years old. Knowledge was implanted directly into his brain through telepathic interfaces, language, history, mathematics, combat techniques, the equivalent of a high school education downloaded like software. But there was no wisdom in that knowledge, no context, no understanding of what it meant to be alive. Failsafes were being prepared, programming that would ensure the clone's obedience, commands that would allow Cadmus to control him, to shut him down if necessary, to prevent him from ever becoming a threat. They never got the chance to install them. Deep within Cadmus, a group of young clones, the Newsboy Legion, children created by the facility and raised in its sterile halls, had been watching. They had seen what Cadmus did to its failures. They had seen the bodies disposed of, the experiments terminated, the lives discarded like broken equipment, and they decided that this clone deserved better. In the dead of night, they broke into the incubation chamber. They shattered the glass. They pulled the teenager from his tank and wrapped him in clothes, jeans, boots, a leather jacket that one of them had stolen from a storage locker. The clone opened his eyes for the first time. He saw fluorescent lights. He saw frightened faces. He felt air on his skin. Real air, not the recycled atmosphere of the tank. One of the Newsboy Legion pressed something into his hand, an earring, a symbol of rebellion. "Run," the boy whispered. "Get out of here. Be free." And for the first time in his existence, the clone who would become Superboy made a choice. He ran toward the light. He burst into the sunlight like a newborn god. The clone had never felt warmth like this. Real warmth, not the regulated temperature of an incubation tank. The sun blazed overhead, and something within him responded. His cells drank in the yellow light. His muscles surged with power he had never tested. The implanted knowledge in his brain told him what he was supposed to be, a replacement for Superman, a continuation of the legacy. But knowledge is not understanding. And the teenager standing in the streets of Metropolis, blinking against the brightness of a world he had never seen, understood almost nothing about the mantle he was claiming. He understood only one thing with perfect clarity. He was alive, and he intended to stay that way. The world was desperate for Superman. In the weeks following the hero's death, crime had surged. Supervillains who had once cowered at the mention of the Man of Steel now operated with impunity. Ordinary citizens locked their doors and prayed for deliverance. The Justice League did what they could, but they were stretched thin, and none of them could fill the void that Superman had left behind. Into this vacuum stepped 4 figures, each claiming connection to the fallen hero. The first called himself the Man of Tomorrow. He appeared in Metropolis wearing a suit of gleaming metal, his left eye replaced by a glowing red optic, half his body visibly mechanical. He claimed to be Superman reborn, his consciousness transferred into a cyborg body after his physical form was destroyed. He was calm, authoritative, and utterly convincing. The world wanted to believe him. The second called himself the last son of Krypton. He wore a visor that concealed his eyes, and his methods were brutal. Where Superman had always sought to preserve life, this figure dealt death to criminals without hesitation. He claimed to be Superman's essence, purified of weakness, freed from the naive mercy that had allowed Doomsday to land a killing blow. Some hailed him as a necessary evolution, others recoiled in horror. The third made no claim to be Superman at all. He called himself the Man of Steel, John Henry Irons, a weapons engineer who had once been saved by Superman and now sought to honour his memory. He wore a suit of armour he had built himself, wielded a massive hammer, and fought crime in Metropolis's most dangerous neighbourhoods. He was human, mortal, and driven by gratitude rather than ambition. And then there was the Kid. He exploded onto the scene with all the subtlety of a fireworks display. Young, brash, and impossibly confident, he wore a version of Superman's costume modified with a leather jacket and an earring that glinted in the light. His hair was wild, his smile was cocky, and from the moment he opened his mouth he made one thing absolutely clear. "Don't call me Superboy," he told anyone who would listen. "I'm Superman." The media devoured him. Her name was Tana Moon, and she was hungry for a story. WGBS was locked in a ratings war with the Daily Planet's broadcast division, and the appearance of multiple supermen was the biggest story of the decade. Tana had been assigned to cover the phenomenon, and when she encountered the teenage Superman on a rooftop, overlooking Metropolis, she knew she had found her angle. He was everything the other supermen were not. Young, accessible, charming in a rough-edged, unpolished way. He flirted with her shamelessly during their first interview, flexing for the camera and delivering sound bites that were equal parts bravado and vulnerability. "Superman saved me," he told her, the lie coming easily. He did not yet know the truth of his origins, that he was no rescue case, but a creation. And now I'm going to carry on his legacy. I've got his powers, I've got his look, and I've got something the old Superman never had. Tana raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" The Kid grinned. "Style." The interview aired that night. By morning, the teenager was a sensation. Vincent Edge, the ruthless head of WGBS, saw dollar signs. He arranged for exclusive coverage of the young Superman's exploits, turning every battle into a media event. The Kid revelled in the attention. He posed for photographs, he signed autographs. He kissed babies and winked at cameras and treated heroism like a performance. But performance has consequences, and the Kid was about to learn that the hard way. His name was Steel Hand, and he was a two-bit gangster with a cybernetic arm and delusions of grandeur. The Kid tracked him to a warehouse in Suicide Slum, confident that the confrontation would be quick and easy. He had powers, after all. He could fly. He was strong. What could a common criminal do against someone like him? The answer arrived in the form of a helicopter. Steel Hand had hostages, a news crew that had been covering his activities. When the Kid burst through the warehouse wall, the gangster panicked. He fired wildly, and one of his shots struck the tail rotor of the helicopter hovering overhead. The aircraft spun out of control, plummeting toward the street. The Kid moved fast. He caught the helicopter, lowering it safely to the ground. He saved the cameraman, the reporter, the pilot's assistant. He was a hero. But he was not fast enough to save everyone. The pilot, a man named Sam McCoa, father of two, veteran of 15 years in the air, was thrown from the cockpit during the spin. He hit the pavement before the Kid even realized he was falling. By the time the teenager reached him, Sam McCoa was dead. The Kid stood over the body, his hands trembling. He had never seen death before. Not real death. Not the death of someone who had been alive moments ago, and was now simply gone. The implanted knowledge in his brain had taught him about mortality as an abstract concept. But this was not abstract. This was blood on concrete. This was a life ended because he had not been good enough, fast enough, smart enough. A hand landed on his shoulder, heavy, armoured. The Man of Steel, John Henry Irons, stood behind him, his expression unreadable behind the faceplate of his helmet. "You're reckless," Irons said. His voice was not cruel, but it was not kind either. It was the voice of a man who had seen too many preventable tragedies. You charge in without thinking, you treat this like a game, and people die because of it. The kid opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to explain that he had tried his best. Your best isn't good enough, Irons continued. Not yet. Maybe not ever if you don't change. Superman didn't become a hero because he had powers. He became a hero because he understood responsibility, because he knew that every choice he made had consequences. He gestured toward the body on the ground. That man had a family, children, a life, and now he's gone, because you wanted to make an entrance. The kid said nothing. There was nothing to say. Irons turned and walked away, his cape flowing behind him, and the teenager who called himself Superman stood alone in the wreckage, learning for the first time that power without wisdom was not a gift. It was a curse. The cyborg Superman revealed his true nature on the day Coast City died. For weeks, the man of tomorrow had cultivated trust. He had saved lives, stopped crimes, presented himself as the legitimate heir to Superman's legacy. The world embraced him. Even the other Supermen deferred to his authority. It was all a lie. The being called the cyborg Superman was not Superman reborn. He was Hank Henshaw, a former astronaut whose body had been destroyed in a space accident, his consciousness surviving as pure energy. He blamed Superman for his fate. He had allied himself with the alien warlord Mongol, and together they had constructed a nightmare. Engine City rose from the ruins of Coast City like a mechanical tumour. 7 million people, the entire population of the metropolitan area, were annihilated in an instant, their homes converted into fuel for a weapon that would transform Earth into a new war world. The cyborg stood at the centre of his creation, broadcasting his triumph to a horrified planet. And the kid was captured. He had rushed to Coast City when reports of the attack reached Metropolis, convinced that his powers would be enough to stop whatever was happening. He was wrong. The cyborg's technology neutralized his tactile telekinesis. Mongol soldiers overwhelmed him. He was dragged into the depths of Engine City and imprisoned in a cell designed to hold Kryptonians. For the first time since his creation, the kid experienced true helplessness. He hung in his restraints, stripped of his jacket, stripped of his bravado, stripped of everything except fear. The cyborg visited him once, gloating about the destruction to come. Metropolis would be next, then Gotham, then the world. "You're not Superman," the cyborg whispered, his mechanical face inches from the kid's. "You're nothing, a failed experiment, a copy of a copy, and when I'm finished no one will even remember you existed." But the kid was not nothing. In the darkest moment of his young life, something stirred within him. Not confidence. That had been beaten out of him. Not arrogance. That had died with Sam Makoa. Something else. Something quieter. Something that felt almost like determination. He was going to escape. He was going to warn the others, and he was going to stop this monster, or die trying. The escape was desperate, brutal, and nearly fatal. Mongol had grown careless, convinced that the kid was no threat. But tactile telekinesis was not a power that could be fully suppressed. Not when the user was willing to push beyond every limit, to risk tearing his own body apart in the process. The kid broke his restraints through sheer force of will, disabled 2 guards before they could raise an alarm, and fled through the labyrinthine corridors of Engine City. He emerged into chaos. The real Superman had returned. The Man of Steel, the true Man of Steel, Kal-El himself, resurrected through Kryptonian technology and clad in a black suit, was leading an assault on Engine City. Supergirl fought at his side, John Henry Irons wielded his hammer, against Mongol's forces. Even the Eradicator, the brutal last son of Krypton, had joined the battle. The kid threw himself into the fight. He was exhausted, wounded, operating on nothing but adrenaline and spite. But he fought alongside legends. He helped bring down the cyborg. He watched Mongol fall. He stood in the ashes of Coast City as the weapon was destroyed and the threat ended. And when it was over, Superman approached him. The kid braced himself for criticism, for disappointment, for the same lecture that John Henry Irons had delivered weeks ago. Instead, Superman extended his hand. "You did well," he said. "I've been watching you. You've made mistakes, serious ones. But you came through when it mattered." He paused, studying the teenager's face. "You're not me. You never will be. But that doesn't mean you can't be a hero in your own right." The kid hesitated. Then he took Superman's hand. "So, what do I call myself?" he asked. "If I'm not Superman?" The Man of Steel smiled, a tired smile, but a genuine one. "How about Superboy?" For a long moment, the kid said nothing. The name had felt like an insult once, a diminishment, a reminder that he was less than what he was supposed to be. But standing in the ruins of Coast City, surrounded by heroes who had fought and bled and triumphed, the name sounded different. It sounded like a beginning. "Superboy," he repeated, testing the word. "Yeah, I can work with that." The palm trees swayed in the tropical breeze, and Superboy decided that Paradise agreed with him. Metropolis had become suffocating. The real Superman was back, and the city that had once treated the kid like a celebrity now looked at him with awkward uncertainty. He was yesterday's news. The temporary replacement, the stand-in, the clone who had served his purpose and was no longer needed. Every time he flew over the skyline, he felt the weight of comparison. Every save, every rescue, every moment of heroism was measured against the original. He needed space. He needed somewhere he could be himself, not a shadow of Superman, but his own kind of hero. Hawaii called to him. It started as a promotional tour. Rex Leach, the fast-talking manager who had attached himself to Superboy during the reign of the Supermen, saw opportunity in the islands. Beaches, tourists, media coverage, a perfect stage for his young meal ticket. Rex's daughter, Roxy, tagged along, rolling her eyes at her father's schemes while secretly enjoying the adventure. What was supposed to be a 2-week publicity stunt became something more. Superboy fell in love with the islands, not romantically, not yet, but with a deep, unexpected affection for the place itself. The warmth of the sun on his skin, the crash of waves against volcanic rock, the laid-back attitude of the locals who cared less about his celebrity and more about whether he could help when trouble arose. And trouble arose constantly. The villains of Hawaii were different from those of Metropolis. There were no world-conquering masterminds here, no alien invasions or reality-warping crises. Instead, Superboy faced threats that were stranger, more personal, more rooted in the mythology of the Pacific. He battled Sidearm, a mercenary with a cybernetic weapon system grafted to his body. He clashed with Knockout, a warrior woman from Apocalypse whose strength nearly matched his own, and whose flirtations confused him in ways he did not fully understand. He confronted the Silicon Dragons, a tech-based gang that had carved out territory in Honolulu's underworld. Each battle taught him something new about his powers. Tactile telekinesis, the scientist at Cadmus had called it, the ability to generate a telekinetic field around his body, extending it to anything he touched. It was how he flew, not through some innate Kryptonian gift, but by lifting himself with his own mind. It was how he hit with superhuman force, channeling telekinetic energy through his fists. It was how he survived impacts that would have killed an ordinary human, wrapping himself in an invisible shield of pure will. But it was not the same as Superman's power. Not really. And the more Superboy pushed his abilities, the more he became aware of their limitations. He could not fire heat vision from his eyes. He could not freeze enemies with his breath. He could not see through walls or hear heartbeats from miles away. His powers were simulations, approximations, clever workarounds designed by scientists who could not replicate the real thing. For a time, he told himself it did not matter. He was still a hero. He was still saving lives. The how was less important than the what. But the question lingered in the back of his mind, growing louder with each passing month. What am I? Really? Tana Moon arrived in Hawaii 6 months after Superboy did. She had left WGBS under contentious circumstances, something about editorial interference and compromised journalistic integrity. The details were murky, but the result was clear. She was freelancing now, chasing stories on her own terms, and the biggest story she knew was the teenage superhero who had captured her attention from the moment they met. Their relationship evolved slowly. At first, it was professional. Tana covered Superboy's exploits, conducted interviews, documented his growth from reckless newcomer to established protector. But late-night conversations turned personal. Shared meals became routine. The line between reporter and subject blurred. then vanished entirely. Superboy had never experienced anything like this. The implanted knowledge in his brain included information about human relationships, clinical descriptions of attraction, bonding, reproduction, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of falling for someone. The nervousness when she walked into a room, the way his thoughts drifted to her during quiet moments, the desperate desire to impress her, to be worthy of her attention, was, in many ways, still a child. Chronologically, he was less than 2 years old. Emotionally, he was navigating terrain that most humans spent their entire adolescence learning to understand. Tana saw past his bravado. She saw the uncertainty beneath the confidence, the loneliness beneath the fame, and she loved him anyway, or perhaps because of it. Their relationship would not last forever. The pressures of heroism, the complications of age and experience, the fundamental strangeness of loving someone who had been grown in a tank, all of it would eventually pull them apart. But for a brief, shining period, Superboy knew what it meant to be loved. It made what came next even harder to bear. He returned to Cadmus seeking answers. The facility that had created him still operated beneath Metropolis, its corridors humming with the same sterile efficiency that had defined his birth. Superboy walked through those halls as a visitor now, not a prisoner, but the walls still felt like they were closing in. Every corner reminded him of the tank where he had floated in dreamless suspension. Every scientist's face triggered fragmentary memories of the implantation process, when knowledge had been forced into its brain like water into a sponge. He demanded the truth about his origins, and the scientist, perhaps impressed by his heroism or simply tired of keeping secrets, gave it to him. The revelation shattered everything he thought he knew. He was not a clone of Superman. The Kryptonian DNA had never stabilized. Every attempt to replicate it directly had failed. What the scientist had created instead was something different, a genetically engineered human, modified at the cellular level to resemble Superman as closely as possible. His appearance, his build, his superficial similarities to the Man of Steel, all of it was the result of careful genetic manipulation, not cloning. His powers came from the tactile telekinesis field, which was itself an attempt to replicate the bioelectric aura that surrounded Superman's body. It was sophisticated technology, bleeding-edge science, but it was not Kryptonian. It was human, enhanced, augmented, pushed to the absolute limits of what human biology could achieve, but human nonetheless. And the DNA that had been used to create him, the human genetic material that formed the foundation of his existence, it belonged to Paul Westfield, the director of Cadmus, the man who had ordered his creation. Superboy stood in the laboratory where he had been born, surrounded by the scientists who had built him, and felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. He was not Superman's legacy. He was not even a shadow of Krypton. He was Westfield's project, a weapon designed to wear a hero's face, grown in a tank by a man with delusions of control. Everything he had believed about himself was a lie. XX found him on the roof of the facility, staring at the Metropolis skyline. The DN alien was one of Cadmus's oldest creations, a telepathic being with grey skin and gentle eyes, who had spent decades navigating the moral complexities of his own existence. He understood what Superboy was feeling better than anyone else could. "You're not defined by your origins," XX said, settling beside him. "I was created as a tool just as you were, but I chose to become something more. That choice is available to you as well." Superboy shook his head. "You don't get it. I thought I was connected to Superman. I thought there was something in me that came from him, something that made me matter, but I'm just a copy, a fake, a knockoff pretending to be the real thing." "You are what you choose to be," XX replied. "Superman's legacy is not in his DNA, it is in his actions, in his compassion, in his willingness to help others regardless of the cost to himself." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You have demonstrated those qualities already. The question is whether you will continue to demonstrate them, or whether you will let this revelation destroy you." For a long moment, Superboy said nothing. The city lights glittered below, indifferent to his crisis. Then slowly he rose to his feet. "I need some time," he said, "to figure out who I am, what I want to be." XX nodded. "That is the journey of every sentient being. You're not alone in facing it." The months that followed were a wandering time. Superboy drifted. He returned to Hawaii briefly, then left again. He fell in with the Ravers, a loose collective of superpowered young people who travelled the cosmos attending parties and seeking thrills. It was escapism, pure and simple, a way to avoid the questions that haunted him. But escapism has limits. The questions always return, and Superboy, whether he admitted it or not, was searching for something that parties and adventures could not provide. He was searching for family. He was searching for belonging. He was searching for a team. The call came on the worst possible day. Superboy had been drifting for weeks, caught between the life he had built in Hawaii and the existential crisis that had upended everything. He was staying in a motel outside Metropolis, watching news coverage of Superman saving a collapsing building, when his communicator crackled to life. "This is Robin. I'm transmitting coordinates. Get here now. The world is ending." The voice belonged to Tim Drake, the third Robin, protege of Batman, a teenager who had deduced the Dark Knight's secret identity through pure detective work and demanded the right to fight at his side. Superboy had encountered him briefly during the reign of the Supermen, but they had never worked together directly. Now apparently they would. Superboy flew toward the coordinates without hesitation. Whatever his doubts about himself, whatever his uncertainty about his place in the world, one thing remained constant. When someone needed help, he answered. He arrived to find chaos. The villain called himself Bedlam, and he was rewriting reality. A teenager with godlike powers, the son of a demon and a human, born with the ability to reshape the universe according to his whims, Bedlam had decided that adults were the source of all the world's problems. His solution was elegant in its madness. He simply removed them. Every adult on Earth vanished simultaneously, transported to a pocket dimension beyond reach. Parents disappeared mid-sentence. Teachers evaporated from classrooms. Governments collapsed as leaders blinked out of existence. In a single moment, the world became a planet of children, confused, frightened, and utterly unprepared for the catastrophe that had befallen them. 3 young heroes converged on the epicenter of the crisis. Robin arrived first, grappling down from the Gotham skyline with his cape billowing behind him. He had already deduced Bedlam's location through a combination of satellite imagery and pattern analysis, his mind working at speeds that bordered on superhuman. Impulse arrived second. Bart Allen, grandson of the Flash, a speedster from the 30th century who had been sent back in time to learn patience and discipline. He had learned neither. What he had learned was how to move faster than thought, how to vibrate through solid matter, and how to annoy everyone around him with a stream of consciousness that never seemed to pause for breath. Superboy arrived third, crashing through the wall of the abandoned factory where Bedlam had made his lair. "So," he said, brushing debris from his jacket, "anyone have a plan?" Robin glared at him. "I had a plan. It involved stealth, which you just ruined." "Stealth is boring," Impulse interjected, zipping around the room at impossible speed. "Also, too late now. The creepy kid knows we're here." Bedlam emerged from the shadows, his eyes glowing with eldritch power. He was younger than any of them, perhaps 12 or 13, but the force radiating from his body made age irrelevant. He smiled at the 3 heroes with the calm confidence of someone who had already won. "You can't stop me," he said. "I've remade the world. No more adults, no more rules, no more being told what to do." Superboy cracked his knuckles. "Yeah, that's not going to work for us." The battle that followed was brutal, chaotic, and frequently improvised. They should not have won. Bedlam's power was beyond anything the 3 young heroes had faced individually. He warped space around Robin's batarangs, causing them to curve away harmlessly. He slowed time around Impulse, trapping the speedster in a bubble of frozen moments. He caught Superboy's fists in fields of telekinetic force, matching the clone's power with reality-bending ease. But the 3 of them together were something Bedlam had not anticipated. Robin analysed. While the others fought, he studied Bedlam's patterns, the way his powers fluctuated, the tells that preceded each reality warp, the moments when his concentration slipped. He relayed his observations through their communicators, building a picture of the villain's weaknesses in real time. Impulse adapted. Every time Bedlam tried to trap him, he changed tactics, vibrating at different frequencies, approaching from unexpected angles, forcing the young god to split his attention across multiple fronts. He was chaos incarnate, impossible to predict, exhausting to counter. And Superboy endured. He absorbed punishment that would have killed a normal human, kept fighting through injuries that should have incapacitated him, drew Bedlam's focus again and again so the others could maneuver. He was not the smartest. He was not the fastest. But he was stubborn, and his stubbornness gave Robin the opening he needed. "Now!" Robin shouted. "His left side. He drops his guard when he's focusing on time manipulation." Impulse blurred. Superboy lunged, and Robin threw a batarang loaded with a neural disruptor, striking Bedlam in the temple at the exact moment the young god's concentration shattered. The reality warps collapsed. The pocket dimension ruptured. Adults began reappearing across the globe, confused and disoriented but alive. Bedlam fell unconscious, his power spent. And 3 teenagers stood in the wreckage, breathing hard, looking at each other with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "That was insane," Impulse said, grinning. "We should do it again." Robin rubbed his temples. "We should never do anything like that again. We almost died multiple times." Superboy laughed, a genuine laugh, the first in weeks. "So what you're saying is we make a good team." The glare Robin gave him could have melted steel, but beneath it, barely visible, was the ghost of a smile. Young Justice was not founded so much as it happened. There was no grand ceremony, no official charter, no Justice League sanctioning their existence. 3 young heroes had fought together, discovered they worked well as a unit, and, simply, kept doing it. They established a headquarters in an abandoned resort called the Happy Harbour Hilton. They took on cases that fell beneath the Justice League's notice. They built a reputation, one mission at a time. Others joined. Wonder Girl arrived first. Cassie Sandsmark, daughter of an archaeologist and, as would later be revealed, the Greek god Zeus himself. She had powers granted by the artifacts of Olympus, and a fierce determination to prove herself worthy of the Wonder Woman legacy. She also had an obvious, barely concealed crush on Superboy that he remained oblivious to for an embarrassingly long time. Arrowette followed. Sissy King Jones, an archer trained by her obsessive mother to be a vigilante whether she wanted to be or not. She struggled with the violence inherent in heroism, eventually retiring to pursue a normal life, but her time with the team left lasting bonds. Secret came next, a mysterious girl made of smoke and shadow with no memory of her past, and powers she barely understood. She was haunted, vulnerable, and desperately in need of friends who would accept her strangeness. Empress joined later, Anita Fight, whose parents were agents of a shadowy organization and whose own abilities derived from voodoo mysticism. She brought a different perspective, a different background, a reminder that heroism took many forms, and at the center of it all, holding the team together through force of personality and sheer stubbornness, was the unlikely trio that had started everything. Robin was the leader, reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence. He planned their missions, managed their resources, kept them focused when chaos threatened to overwhelm them. His relationship with Superboy was contentious in the early days, each of them pushing against the other, testing boundaries. But beneath the friction was genuine respect. They were brothers in all the ways that mattered. Impulse was the wild card, unpredictable, impulsive in ways that went beyond his name, constantly testing the patience of everyone around him. But his heart was pure, his loyalty absolute, and his speed saved their lives more times than any of them could count. And Superboy was the heart. Not the smartest, not the fastest, not the most skilled, but the one who never gave up, who threw himself into danger without hesitation, who believed in the team even when the team doubted itself. His confidence, once rooted in arrogance, had evolved into something sturdier. He believed in Young Justice because Young Justice had given him something he had never had before. A family. The adventure through hypertime changed everything. It began with a death, a Superboy from another reality stumbling through a portal into the Watchtower and collapsing at the feet of the Justice League. Before he died, he managed to gasp out a warning. Something was hunting the Superboys of the multiverse. Something powerful, something that could not be stopped. Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman explained the concept of hypertime to the assembled young heroes. Reality was not a single stream, but a vast river of possibilities, countless alternate timelines flowing alongside each other. Travel between them was possible, though dangerous. And somewhere in that infinite expanse, a predator was moving. Superboy volunteered to investigate. It was his legacy, after all, his alternate selves being hunted, and part of him, a part he did not fully acknowledge, wanted to know what other versions of himself existed, what he might have become under different circumstances. The journey took him to worlds beyond imagination. He visited realities where he had never escaped Cadmus, where he remained a weapon under Westfield's control. He visited realities where Superman had never returned, where Superboy had grown into the sole protector of Earth. He visited realities where he had turned villain, where the darkness in his origins had consumed him entirely, and he met Black Zero. Black Zero was Superboy without mercy. In his reality, the clone had never been freed by the Newsboy Legion. He had grown to maturity inside Cadmus, his programming perfected, his will subsumed beneath layers of conditioning. When he finally broke free, it was not as a hero, but as a conqueror. He seized control of Cadmus, transformed it into an empire, and began reaching across hypertime to subjugate other realities. He was everything Superboy feared he might become, the weapon Cadmus had designed, the monster lurking in his DNA. Their battle raged across multiple realities, each clash threatening to tear the fabric of existence. Black Zero was stronger, fully matured, ruthlessly trained, possessing none of the moral limitations that constrained his counterpart. He should have won. But Superboy was not alone. The other Superboys of Hypertime, the survivors, the ones who had escaped Black Zero's predation, rallied to his side. Together they overwhelmed the Tyrant, trapping him in a collapsed timeline, ending his threat forever. And in the aftermath, as reality stabilized around him, Superboy made a discovery that would change his relationship with Superman forever. During his journey through Hypertime, he had encountered a young Kal-El, the original Superboy, Clark Kent in his teenage years. In that meeting, deduction clicked into place. The pieces he had never quite assembled suddenly formed a complete picture. Superman was Clark Kent, the man who had given him a chance, who had believed in him when no one else did, who had offered him the name Superboy as a gift rather than an insult. He was not just a hero, he was a man with a family, a history, a secret identity that he had protected for decades. And he had never told Superboy the truth. The resentment was immediate, sharp, and painful. But it did not last. Because as Superboy reflected on the revelation, he understood something else as well. Clark had accepted him, despite the lies, despite the secrets, despite the fundamental strangeness of their relationship. Superman had treated him as family, and in the end that mattered more than any secret. The Fortress of Solitude rose from the Arctic ice like a cathedral of crystal. Superboy had heard stories about this place, whispered legends among the superhero community, reverent descriptions of the last fragment of Krypton preserved on Earth. But nothing had prepared him for the reality. The walls were not walls at all, but vast crystalline structures that seemed to grow organically from the frozen ground, refracting light into rainbows that danced across every surface. The air was cold but clean, carrying a faint hum of alien technology. And everywhere, there were reminders of a world that had died before Superboy was ever conceived. Superman walked beside him in silence, letting the young hero absorb the magnitude of what he was seeing. They passed through chambers filled with Kryptonian, artifacts, weapons and tools and works of art from a civilization that had mastered sciences beyond human comprehension. They walked beneath holographic displays that showed star maps of galaxies Superboy could not name, recordings of alien languages that sounded like music. They stopped before a massive crystalline console that pulsed with inner light. "This is the memory core," Superman said. "It contains everything that remains of Kryptonian knowledge, history, science, culture, the collected wisdom of 1 billion souls preserved in crystal." Superboy stared at the console, overwhelmed. "Why are you showing me this?" Superman turned to face him, and there was something in his expression that Superboy had never seen before. Vulnerability, uncertainty, the weight of words that had been long considered but never spoken. "Because you deserve to understand where I come from," Superman said, "and because I want you to experience it for yourself." He touched the console and the world dissolved into light. Krypton blazed around them. It was a simulation, Superboy knew, a virtual reality constructed from the fortress's memory banks. But the detail was so perfect, so complete, that the knowledge did nothing to diminish the impact. He stood on the surface of a world that had died decades ago, beneath a red sun that cast everything in shades of crimson and amber. The architecture was impossible. Towers spiraled toward clouds that moved in patterns too precise to be natural. Vehicles drifted through the air without visible propulsion. Citizens walked the streets in robes of shimmering fabric, their faces calm, their movements graceful. This was a civilization at its apex, masters of science and art, conquerors of challenges that humanity had not yet imagined. And it was all gone. Superman guided him through the simulation, narrating as they walked. He showed Superboy the great universities where Kryptonian children learned to harness the fundamental forces of the universe. He showed him the council chambers where leaders debated the fate of worlds. He showed him the birthing matrices where new life was engineered with mathematical precision, and he showed him the House of El. The family crest hung above an entrance carved from living crystal, the familiar S shape that Superboy wore on his chest, rendered here in its original context. Superman explained its meaning, not a letter, but a symbol, hope, the guiding principle of his family passed down through generations. "My father was Jor-El," Superman said, "a scientist, one of the greatest minds Krypton ever produced. He discovered that our world was dying, that the planet's core had become unstable and would eventually tear itself apart. He tried to warn the council. They didn't listen." The simulation shifted, showing a man in white robes standing before a vast audience pleading for action. The faces of the council members were skeptical, dismissive. They had built a perfect civilization. The idea that it could end was simply inconceivable. When he realized he couldn't save everyone, he saved what he could, Superman continued. He built a ship, small enough for one passenger. He placed me inside and launched me toward Earth, moments before Krypton exploded. The sky turned white, the crystal towers shattered, the people screamed, and then there was silence. Superboy stood in the void where a world had been, watching fragments of crystal drift through empty space. He understood, in that moment, why Superman carried himself the way he did. The weight of being the last, the burden of remembering what everyone else had forgotten. "I'm showing you this," Superman said, "because I want you to understand that legacy is not about blood, is not about genetics, it's about what we carry forward, what we choose to preserve." He turned to face Superboy directly, and the simulation faded around them, leaving only the cold light of the fortress. "You are not my clone," Superman said. "I know that now. The science didn't work the way Cadmus intended, but that doesn't mean you aren't connected to what I represent. You wear my symbol. You fight for the same ideals. You have proven again and again that you understand what it means to be a hero." Superboy felt his throat tighten. "I'm not Kryptonian. I'm not even a real copy. I'm just—" "You are what you choose to be," Superman interrupted, "and I choose to recognize you as family." He reached out and placed his hand on Superboy's shoulder. "I want to give you something. A name, a Kryptonian name, to mark your place in the House of El." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "From this day forward, you are Con-El. It means he who stands apart but stands with us. A branch of the family tree that grew in unexpected soil. Con-El." The name resonated in ways Superboy could not articulate. For his entire existence, he had been defined by what he was not Superman, not a true clone, not a real person. He had been the kid, the replacement, the experiment. He had been Superboy because no one had offered him anything better. Now, for the first time, he had a name that was entirely his own. The tears came without warning. He did not try to stop them. Smallville was nothing like Metropolis. Where the city of tomorrow blazed with neon and chrome, Smallville drowsed beneath endless Kansas sky. The main street was 3 blocks long. The tallest building was 4 stories. Corn grew in fields that stretched to the horizon, and the loudest sounds were crickets and the occasional tractor engine. It should have felt boring. It should have felt like exile. Instead, it felt like coming home. Martha Kent met him at the door of the farmhouse, her arms already open for an embrace. She was small and silver-haired and possessed a warmth that radiated from her like heat from a hearth. She had raised Superman, had taken a baby from the stars and taught him to be human, and now she was extending that same love to his strange, complicated, almost brother. "Welcome home, Connor," she said. Connor Kent. The civilian name they had created together, a human identity to match his Kryptonian one. Clark's cousin, arrived from out of state to help on the farm and attend the local high school. A simple cover story for a complicated existence. Jonathan Kent shook his hand with the grip of a man who had worked the land his entire life. He was quieter than Martha, more reserved, but his eyes held the same acceptance. He did not ask Connor to prove himself. He simply treated him as family and expected Connor to live up to that treatment. The first weeks were an adjustment. Connor had never attended school before, real school, with classmates and teachers and homework. His implanted knowledge gave him the academic foundations, but social navigation was another matter entirely. He was awkward, uncertain, prone to saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. His strength made him clumsy in ways that normal teenagers were not. He broke pencils by gripping them too hard. He accidentally crushed a locker handle during a moment of frustration. But slowly, gradually, he learned. He made friends, real friends, not teammates or allies, but people who knew him as Connor rather than Superboy. He ate dinner with the Kents every night, helping with dishes, talking about nothing in particular. He did chores on the farm, discovering that physical labour had a meditative quality when you were not fighting for your life, and he found something he had never expected to find: peace. For the first time since his creation, Connor did not feel like he was running. He was not chasing Superman's shadow or fleeing his Cadmus origins, or searching for purpose in an endless parade of battles. He was simply living, existing, being. Krypto arrived unexpectedly. Superman's Kryptonian dog, a refugee from the same dying world, who took one look at Connor and decided that this strange clone was worthy of loyalty. The dog slept at the foot of Connor's bed, accompanied him on flights across the Kansas plains, and provided a companionship that asked nothing and gave everything. Martha noticed the change in him. She mentioned it one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of gold and amber. "You seem lighter," she said. "When you first arrived, you carried yourself like you were waiting for something terrible to happen, like you didn't believe you deserved to be here." Connor considered the observation. "I didn't. For a long time I thought I was just a mistake, an accident, something that was never supposed to exist. And now?" He looked out at the fields, at the sky, at the world that had somehow become his home. "Now I think maybe I was supposed to exist after all, just not for the reasons anyone expected." Martha smiled and patted his hand. "That's the secret, you know," she said. "None of us are here for the reasons we expect. The point is to figure out why we're really here, and then to live up to it." Connor thought about that for a long time after she went inside. He thought about the fortress and Krypton and the name Con-El. He thought about the House of El and what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. And he thought about the future, the challenges that awaited, the battles still to come, the darkness that lurked in his very DNA, Lex Luthor's DNA. He did not know it yet. The truth of his genetic heritage remained hidden, buried in classified files that even Cadmus had tried to destroy. But the day of revelation was coming, and when it arrived, everything Connor had built, every certainty, every peace, every sense of belonging, would be tested to its breaking point. For now, though, he sat on the porch of a Kansas farmhouse, watching the stars emerge one by one, and allowed himself to believe that he had finally found his place. Donna Troy died in his arms. The battle had been chaos from the start. A rogue Superman robot gone berserk, its programming corrupted, its power levels catastrophic. The combined forces of the Titans and Young Justice had responded to the crisis, throwing everything they had at the mechanical nightmare. But the robot was designed to fight Superman himself. Against teenagers, even powered ones, it was virtually unstoppable. Donna had been the one to create the opening, the original Wonder Girl, now a woman grown, a hero who had fought alongside legends since before most of them were born. She had wrapped her lasso around the robot's arm, pulling it off balance, giving the others a chance to strike. The robot's other arm came around faster than anyone could react. The impact was thunderous. Donna flew backward, her body broken, her eyes already dimming. Connor caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her in arms that could bend steel but could not stop death. "It's okay," she whispered, blood on her lips. "You'll be okay. All of you." And then she was gone. The robot fell moments later, destroyed by the combined fury of heroes who no longer cared about restraint. But the victory was hollow. Donna Troy, mentor, friend, sister in all the ways that mattered, had paid the price. Young Justice did not survive the loss. The team dissolved in the weeks that followed. Grief takes different forms. For some, it manifests as anger, a desperate need to find someone to blame, something to fight. For others, it becomes withdrawal, a retreat into isolation, a closing of doors that had once been open. For the members of Young Justice, it was both and neither. They simply drifted apart. The joy that had defined their adventures turned to ash. The headquarters at Happy Harbour felt haunted. Every empty chair was a reminder of what they had lost. Connor returned to Smallville. He helped on the farm. He attended school. He pretended that everything was fine, that the hole in his chest would eventually heal, that time would do what time supposedly did. It didn't work. The nightmares came every night. Donna's face, the robot's arm, the weight of her body going limp. He would wake gasping, his sheets torn to shreds by hands that had clenched without his awareness. Martha would find him on the porch at 3 a.m, staring at nothing, and she would sit beside him in silence because there were no words that could help. He was drowning, slowly, quietly, with no one close enough to throw him a line. And then Cyborg called. Victor Stone was a legend in his own right, half man, half machine, transformed by a terrible accident into something that was neither fully human nor fully technological. He had been a founding member of the New Teen Titans, the generation that had come before Young Justice, the heroes who had faced Trigon and Deathstroke and threats that shook the foundations of reality. He understood loss, he understood the weight of survival, and he understood that grief could destroy a hero faster than any villain. "I'm putting together a new team," he told Connor over the communicator. "Titans, the next generation, but with some experienced guidance. Robin's in, Impulse. Kid Flash now, he's trying to grow up a little. He's in, Wonder Girl too." Connor felt something stir beneath the numbness. His friends, his family, still fighting despite everything. "Why me?" he asked. "I'm not exactly in peak condition right now." "None of us are," Cyborg replied. "That's the point. We've all been knocked down. The question is whether we're going to stay down or get back up." A pause. Donna wouldn't want us to quit. She'd want us to honour her by being better, by being heroes. The words hit harder than Connor expected, because Cyborg was right. Donna had believed in them, in Young Justice, in the potential of the next generation. She had fought and died protecting that potential. Giving up would be a betrayal of everything she represented. "Where do I sign up?" Connor asked. He could hear the smile in Cyborg's voice. "Titans Tower, San Francisco. Be there next week." The New Teen Titans were forged in fire. The roster combined veterans and newcomers into something greater than the sum of its parts. Cyborg provided experience and tactical wisdom. Starfire brought alien power and a warrior's heart. Raven offered mystical abilities and a darkness that she struggled constantly to contain. Beast Boy, Garfield Logan, the green-skinned shapeshifter, contributed humour and loyalty in equal measure, and the Young Justice Corps held the centre. Robin led from the front, his strategic brilliance honed by years at Batman's side. Kid Flash provided speed and chaos in carefully balanced proportions. Wonder Girl fought with the fury of the gods themselves, and Connor, Superboy, Connell, the clone who had become so much more, found a new family among the old. He changed his costume during those early days. The leather jacket and flashy accessories of his youth gave way to something simpler, more iconic. A black t-shirt with the S-shield emblazoned on the chest. Faded jeans, work boots. It was a statement of identity. He was not trying to be Superman, but he was proudly connected to that legacy. He was his own hero, wearing the symbol on his own terms. Cassie Sandsmark noticed the change first. She had grown since their Young Justice days. The awkward girl with the obvious crush had become a confident young woman, comfortable in her power, secure in her identity as Wonder Girl. But some things had not changed. The way she looked at Connor, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him, the connection that had been building for years, unacknowledged but undeniable. They became official during a quiet moment between crises. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just two people who had been circling each other for years, finally admitting what had been obvious to everyone else. Connor kissed her on the roof of Titan's tower, beneath a sky full of stars, and felt something inside him heal. He had a name, he had a family, and now he had someone who loved him. For a brief, shining moment, everything seemed possible. The revelation came wrapped in betrayal. Lex Luthor had been patient. For years he had watched his secret investment grow. The clone he had seeded with his own DNA, the weapon he had hidden inside Project Cadmus. He had allowed Superboy to develop, to form attachments, to become emotionally vulnerable. And now, with the Teen Titans providing the perfect stage, he made his move. It began with whispers, hints dropped through intermediaries, fragments of information that found their way to Connor through channels he could not trace. Something was wrong with his origin story. Something had been hidden. Something about his DNA that Cadmus had never revealed. He investigated. He dug through classified files. He confronted scientists who had worked on his creation and watched them pale with fear. And, finally, inevitably, he learned the truth. His human DNA did not come from Paul Westfield. It came from Lex Luthor. The revelation struck like a physical blow. Connor stood in the ruins of a Cadmus substation, surrounded by shattered computers and scattered documents, and felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. Luthor, the most dangerous man on Earth, Superman's greatest enemy, a monster who had committed crimes beyond counting, who had murdered and manipulated and destroyed without remorse. That was his father. That was what lurked in his cells, in his blood, in the very structure of his being. He flew back to Titan's tower in a daze. He told no one. How could he? How could he explain that the hero they trusted, the friend they loved, was literally built from evil? Every time he looked in the mirror, he would see Luthor looking back. Every time he used his powers, he would wonder if the darkness was waking up. The fear ate at him, consumed him, made him question every impulse, every decision, every instinct. And Luthor, watching from his penthouse office, smiled. The attack came without warning. One moment, Connor was training with his teammates in Titan's tower. The next, Luthor's voice was echoing through his mind, verbal commands implanted during his creation, fail-safes that Cadmus had never managed to remove. His body stopped responding to his will. His powers surged beyond his control. He became a puppet. The battle that followed was the worst of Connor's life, not because of the danger, but because he was the danger. He watched helplessly from inside his own skull as his hands tore Cyborg apart, ripping the cybernetic hero limb from mechanical limb. He felt his fist connect with Robin's arm, shattering bone with sickening precision. He saw Cassie's face, horror and heartbreak mixing as the boy she loved tried to kill her. Under Luthor's control, Superboy's power levels reached heights he had never achieved on his own. The telekinetic field that surrounded his body expanded, became a weapon of mass destruction. He was Superman level now, maybe beyond, and every ounce of that power was being directed against his friends. But Luthor had miscalculated. He had built Connor to be a weapon, controllable, obedient, subservient to programming. But Connor had spent years becoming something else. He had learned from the Kents. He had fought alongside heroes. He had chosen, again and again, to be good. That choice was stronger than any programming. Deep inside his mind, in the place where his true self still existed, Connor began to fight back. He clawed against Luthor's commands, refusing to surrender, refusing to become the monster his creator intended. The mental battle was agonizing. Every thought a struggle, every moment of resistance costing him pieces of himself. But he did not stop. And finally, impossibly, he broke free. The telekinetic field collapsed. Connor fell to his knees, sobbing, his hands covered in the metaphorical blood of his teammates. They were alive, injured, some of them badly, but alive. He had stopped himself before the worst could happen, but the damage was done. He left that night. He did not say goodbye to Cassie. He could not bear to see her face, to read the fear in her eyes, to know that she would never fully trust him again. He left a note for Robin, apologizing for the broken arm, apologizing for everything. And then he flew to Smallville, landed in the barn where Clark had once hidden his own secrets, and allowed himself to fall apart. Martha found him there in the morning, curled in the hay like a wounded animal. "I'm a monster," he whispered. "Luthor made me. He put commands in my head. I almost killed them. I almost killed everyone I love." Martha knelt beside him, her old knees protesting, and took his face in her hands. "You stopped," she said. "You fought back. You broke free." Her eyes were fierce, unyielding. "That's not what monsters do, Connor. That's what heroes do." But Connor could not hear her. The darkness was too loud, too consuming. He stayed in Smallville for months, refusing to return to the Titans, refusing to wear the S-shield, refusing to be Superboy. He was terrified of what he might become. And somewhere, in a future he could not yet see, that terror would be justified. Because Superboy Prime was waiting, and the final crisis was coming. The sky was bleeding. Connor looked up from the Kansas fields and watched reality tear itself apart. The blue dome that had sheltered Earth for billions of years was fracturing like glass, revealing glimpses of other worlds beyond, worlds that should not exist, timelines that had been erased, possibilities that had been foreclosed. The multiverse, the infinite tapestry of creation, was collapsing in on itself. And at the center of the catastrophe stood a figure wearing his face, Superboy Prime. He had come from a world called Earth Prime, a universe where superheroes existed only in comic books, where a boy named Clark Kent had discovered he possessed the powers of the fictional Superman. When his world was destroyed during the original crisis on Infinite Earths, he had been saved by Alexander Luthor and taken to a paradise dimension outside of time. He was supposed to be a hero. He was supposed to represent hope. Instead, he had gone mad. Trapped in paradise for what felt like an eternity, watching the heroes of the surviving Earth fail and fall and compromise, Superboy Prime had grown bitter. He had convinced himself that the wrong universe had been saved, that his Earth, his reality, had been the true one, and everything that came after was a corruption. He wanted to tear down creation and rebuild it in his image, and he had the power to do it. Unlike Connor, Superboy Prime was a true Kryptonian. He possessed the full suite of Superman's abilities: heat vision, freeze breath, super speed, invulnerability that bordered on the absolute. He had been empowered by a yellow sun for years, storing energy until his cells blazed with barely contained fury. When he struck, mountains crumbled. When he flew, sonic booms shattered windows for miles. He had already killed members of the Teen Titans, members of the Justice Society. Heroes who had fought for decades fell before him like wheat before a scythe, and now he was coming for the Earth itself. Connor received the call at the Kent farm. Nightwing's voice crackled through the communicator, strained with exhaustion and barely suppressed fear. The situation was beyond critical. Alexander Luthor, the son of Lex Luthor from another destroyed Earth, who had orchestrated much of this crisis, had constructed a massive tower at the center of reality. The tower was pulling surviving Earths from across the multiverse, attempting to merge them into a single, perfect world under his control. If he succeeded, billions would die in the transition. And Superboy Prime was serving as his enforcer. "We need everyone," Nightwing said. "Every hero who can still fight. This is it, Connor. This is the end of everything if we fail." Connor stood in the barn where he had hidden for months, surrounded by the ghosts of his failures. Luthor's programming, the attack on his teammates, the darkness in his DNA that he could not escape. But the world was ending, and hiding would not change what he was. He pulled the black t-shirt over his head. He looked at the S-shield emblazoned on the chest, the symbol of hope, the legacy of the House of El, the mark that connected him to something greater than himself. "I'm on my way," he said. The battle at the tower was apocalyptic. Heroes from every corner of the DC universe had converged on Alexander Luthor's fortress, a twisted spire of otherworldly technology that pierced the wounded sky like a dagger. The Justice League fought alongside the Justice Society. The Teen Titans stood with the outsiders, Green Lanterns and speedsters and warriors from a dozen. Traditions threw themselves against the forces of annihilation. And in the center of it all, two Superboys faced each other. Superboy Prime hovered above the carnage, his eyes blazing with crimson heat vision, his cape, a mockery of Superman's, billowing in winds that existed only for him. He looked at Connor with contempt bordering on disgust. "You're not even real," Prime sneered. "You're a clone, a copy. You don't have Kryptonian DNA. You're just a human pretending to be one of us. You're nothing." Connor felt the words land. They were true, in their way. He was not Kryptonian. He was not Superman's blood. He was a weapon that had chosen to become a hero, a copy that had dared to claim originality. But he had learned something in his short, strange life. Something that Superboy Prime, trapped in his paradise prison, had never understood. Legacy was not about blood. It was about choice. "Maybe I'm nothing," Connor said. "But I'm still going to stop you," he charged. The fight was not a fight. It was a beating. Superboy Prime was stronger, faster, more powerful in every measurable way. His heat vision carved trenches in the ground that Connor barely dodged. His punches landed with force that would have killed ordinary humans instantly. Every blow that connected sent Connor flying, through walls, through vehicles, through the bodies of fallen heroes. But Connor kept getting up, his tactile telekinesis wrapped around him like armor, absorbing impacts that should have shattered his bones. His human Kryptonian hybrid physiology pushed beyond every limit, drawing on reserves he had not known he possessed. He was outmatched, outpowered, outclassed in every way. And he did not stop fighting. Because behind him were his friends, the Teen Titans, the heroes who had given him a family when he had none. If he fell, Prime would tear through them like paper. If he retreated, the monster would reach the tower's controls and unmake reality itself. So he fought, bleeding, breaking, refusing to surrender. "Why won't you stay down?" Prime screamed, frustration cracking his voice. "You can't win! You're nothing! You're worthless!" Connor spat blood and grinned. "Maybe, but I'm still here." He launched himself at Prime again, knowing it was hopeless, knowing he would lose, knowing that every second he bought was a second the other heroes could use. His fists connected with Prime's jaw, once, twice. A flurry of blows that would have leveled buildings. They barely staggered the mad Kryptonian. Prime caught his wrist and squeezed. The bones shattered. Connor screamed. "This is what you get," Prime hissed, "for pretending to be something you're not." He threw Connor aside like garbage, turning his attention to the tower, to Alexander Luthor, to the grand plan that would reshape existence. And Connor, lying in the rubble, broken and bleeding, made a decision. The tower had a weakness. Nightwing had discovered it during the battle, a critical junction point, where the dimensional energies converged. If that point was destroyed, the tower would collapse, the merged Earths would separate, reality would stabilize. But the junction was at the tower's core. Reaching it would require fighting through Prime, through Alexander Luthor's defenses, through forces that had already claimed the lives of heroes far more powerful than Connor. It was a suicide mission. Connor climbed to his feet. His broken wrist hung limp at his side. His ribs were cracked. One eye was swollen shut. He could barely breathe through the blood in his throat, but he could still fly, and he could still fight. He launched himself toward the tower. Prime saw him coming and laughed. "You're pathetic. You can't even—" Connor hit him at full speed, driving both of them through the tower's outer wall into the machinery beyond. He did not try to win the fight. He did not try to overpower his enemy. He simply held on, wrapping his arms around Prime, using his body as a battering ram to smash through barrier after barrier. The junction point glowed ahead, a nexus of impossible energy, the heart of Alexander Luthor's mad design. Prime realized what was happening too late. "No!" he screamed. "You'll kill us both!" Connor looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only peace. "Worth it," he said. He drove his fist into the junction point. The energy exploded outward, consuming everything, the machinery, the tower, the two Superboys locked in their final embrace. Reality convulsed. The merged Earth shuddered and separated. Alexander Luthor's plan collapsed in an instant, and Connor Kent fell. Cassie found him in the wreckage. He was still alive, barely. His body was broken beyond recognition, burned and battered by forces that should have unmade him entirely. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he smiled. "Hey," he whispered. She was crying, sobbing. Her hands hovered over his ruined body, desperate to help, knowing there was nothing she could do. "You idiot!" she choked. You stupid, beautiful idiot, why did you—" "Had to," he said. His voice was fading. Couldn't let him. Couldn't let them. "Don't talk, save your strength. We'll get you help, we'll—" "Cass." His hand found hers, squeezed with what little strength remained. "I love you. I should have said it more." "You're going to be fine," she insisted. "You're going to be fine. You're going to—" "Tell them." His eyes drifted, losing focus. "Tell them I tried. Tell them I was real." His hand went limp. Cassandra Sandsmark, Wonder Girl, daughter of Zeus, threw back her head and screamed at a sky that had finally stopped bleeding. They built statues in his honor, one in Metropolis in the plaza where Superman had fallen to doomsday. Superboy stood beside his almost brother, forever young, forever defiant, fist raised toward a future he would never see. One in Titan's Tower, in the memorial hall where fallen heroes were remembered. His face was carved in marble, his name inscribed beneath, Connor Kent. Connell, Superboy. He gave everything. The superhero community mourned. Superman wept. The Man of Steel, who had seen so much death, who had lost so many, breaking down at the funeral of the boy he had called family. The Teen Titans gathered in silence, unable to process a loss that felt impossible. How could Connor be gone? He had always been there, stubborn, loyal, refusing to quit no matter the odds. Tim Drake and Cassie Sandsmark found comfort in each other during the weeks that followed. Their shared grief became something else, something complicated and guilt-ridden. They were not replacing Connor. They knew that. But in the darkness of loss, they reached for connection, for warmth, for proof that life continued even when it felt like it should not. It would haunt them both when Connor returned. But that return was 1,000 years away, and for now the world knew only this: Superboy was dead. The clone who had become a hero, the weapon who had become a man, the copy who had proven himself original, he had given his life to save everything. And in the quiet halls of Titan's Tower, his friends whispered the words that mattered most. He was real. He was one of us, and we will never forget. 1,000 years is a long time to dream. In the cold silence of a Kryptonian regeneration chamber, suspended between life and death, Connor Kent drifted through memories that might have been real and visions that might have been prophecy. He saw Smallville in summer, the corn standing tall, Martha Kent calling him in for dinner. He saw Cassie's face, luminous with love, before the crisis tore everything apart. He saw his own hands wrapped around the junction point, felt the energy surge through him, experienced again and again the moment of annihilation. But he did not die. The technology that cradled him was ancient and alien, the same regeneration matrix that had once restored Superman after his battle with Doomsday. It was designed to heal wounds that should have been fatal, to rebuild bodies that had been destroyed, to pull souls back from the threshold of oblivion. And in the 31st century, someone had decided to use it on him. Brainiac 5 was the 12th level intellect of his generation, a descendant of the original Brainiac, the android tyrant who had menaced Superman across decades. Quail Dox had rejected his ancestors' villainy and dedicated himself to heroism. He was a founding member of the Legion of Superheroes, that legendary team of young champions who protected the United Planets in an era of starships and teleportation and wonders beyond imagining. He was also, in his own peculiar way, sentimental. Brainiac 5 had studied the historical records obsessively. He knew every detail of Superboy's life, his creation, his struggles, his heroism, his death. He understood the significance of the clone who had worn Superman's shield, the weapon who had chosen to become a champion. And he believed, with the cold certainty of pure logic, that Connor Kent deserved a second chance. The plan had taken decades to execute. First, he had to acquire Connor's body, a corpse that had been preserved in stasis since the Infinite Crisis, waiting for a resurrection that most believed would never come. Then he had to locate the Kryptonian regeneration technology, scattered across a galaxy that had changed beyond recognition since Superman's era. Finally, he had to solve the fundamental problem of Connor's hybrid genetics. The clone had been unstable from the beginning. His human DNA, Luthor's DNA, had been imperfectly bonded with the Kryptonian material, creating a cellular structure that was powerful but fragile. The damage from the Infinite Crisis had pushed that structure past its breaking point. Simple regeneration would not be enough. Brainiac 5's solution was elegant in its simplicity. He acquired a hair from the modern era's Lex Luthor, genetic sample that would allow him to stabilize the clone's human components. He introduced this material into the regeneration matrix, providing the building blocks needed to reconstruct Connor's body at the molecular level. And then he waited. For 1,000 years, Connor Kent floated in amber light, his cells slowly knitting themselves back together, his consciousness wandering through dreams of a world he had left behind. Until the day he woke up. The first thing he saw was light. Not sunlight. Something colder, more artificial, the sterile glow of advanced technology. He was floating in liquid, suspended by forces he could not identify, surrounded by machinery that hummed with quiet efficiency. His body felt strange, new somehow, as if he had been taken apart and rebuilt from the ground up, which, he would later learn, was essentially what had happened. A face appeared beyond the glass of his chamber. Green skin, blonde hair, eyes that held intelligence so vast it was almost frightening. "Welcome back," Brainiac 5 said. "You have been dormant for approximately 1,047 years. I apologize for the delay." Connor opened his mouth to respond and found that he had forgotten how to speak. His vocal cords were new, unpracticed. The words came out as a croak, barely intelligible. "Where? What?" "You're in the 31st century, Brainiac 5 explained, his tone clinical but not unkind. "You died during the Infinite Crisis, sacrificing yourself to prevent the collapse of reality. I have spent considerable resources restoring you to life. You are welcome." The chamber began to drain. Connor felt gravity return, felt his feet touch solid ground for the first time in a millennium. He stumbled, caught himself, looked down at his own hands. They were the same hands that had punched through the junction point, the same hands that had held Cassie's as the light faded from his eyes. "Why?" he managed to ask. "Why bring me back?" Brainiac 5 tilted his head, considering the question. "Because you are needed. Because the crisis is not over. And because—" He paused, something almost like emotion flickering across his features. "Because heroes should not stay dead when there is still work to be done." The legion of superheroes welcomed him as one of their own. They were extraordinary, these champions of the future. Saturn Girl, whose telepathy rivaled anything Connor had encountered. Lightning Lad, who hurled bolts of electricity with casual precision. Cosmic Boy, master of magnetism. Phantom Girl, who could become intangible at will. Dozens of others, each possessing unique abilities, each dedicated to protecting a civilization that spanned the stars. And they knew him. They had grown up on stories of Superboy, not just the original, not just Clark Kent's childhood adventures, but Connor's exploits as well. To them, he was a legend brought to life, a hero from the mythic past walking among them in the flesh. It should have been overwhelming. In many ways, it was. Connor spent his first weeks in the 31st century struggling to process the magnitude of what had happened. Everyone he knew was dead. Smallville had been rebuilt a dozen times over. The Earth itself had changed, its continents reshaped by a millennium of geological drift and technological intervention. But there was no time for extended mourning. Because Brainiac 5 had not resurrected him for sentiment alone. Superboy Prime had returned. The monster who had killed him was tearing reality apart once more. During the 1,000 years of Connor's dormancy, Prime had been imprisoned, trapped in the Source Wall, bound by forces that should have held him for eternity. But eternity is a relative concept, and the Time Trapper, a mysterious entity who manipulated the time stream for inscrutable purposes, had set him free. Now Prime was rampaging across the 31st century, slaughtering legionnaires, destroying worlds, seeking to remake existence in his image. He had an army at his back, the legion of supervillains recruited from across the timeline. He had power that dwarfed anything he had possessed before, and he had rage, burning and endless, fueled by 1,000 years of imprisonment and humiliation. The Legion needed every ally they could find, which was why Brainiac 5 had reached across the dimensions, pulling together not one but 3 versions of the Legion of Superheroes, teams from different timelines, different realities, united against a common threat. And at the centre of this alliance stood Connor Kent. He faced Prime on the battlefield of New Earth, surrounded by legionnaires from across the multiverse. The mad Kryptonian saw him and laughed. That same contemptuous laugh from the Infinite Crisis, the sound of a god mocking an insect. "You again?" Prime sneered. "I killed you once. I'll kill you again." Connor felt the fear. Of course he did. Prime had beaten him, broken him, would have murdered him if the junction point had not intervened. Every logical analysis said he should lose this fight. But logic was not everything, and Connor had spent 1,000 years learning that lesson in dreams. "You killed me," he agreed, "and I'm still here. That's the difference between us, Prime. You tear things down, I build them back up." He attacked. The battle was everything the first one had not been. Connor had changed in his resurrection. The 1,000 years of regeneration had not merely healed him, they had optimized him. His tactile telekinesis was stronger, more refined. His hybrid physiology had stabilized, granting him access to Kryptonian abilities he had never possessed before. He was not Prime's equal, perhaps no one was, but he was closer than he had ever been. And he was not alone. 3 legions fought at his side, dozens of heroes, each bringing unique powers to bear. They coordinated with precision that came from years of teamwork, covering each other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. Prime fell, not easily, not quickly. The battle raged across dimensions, through time itself, leaving scars on reality that would take generations to heal. But in the end, the monster was defeated. Trapped in a pocket dimension, neutralized by technology that even he could not overcome, and Connor stood victorious, breathing hard, surrounded by allies who had fought and bled beside him. "Thank you," he said to Brainiac 5 when the dust settled, "for bringing me back, for giving me this chance." Brainiac 5 nodded, his expression unreadable. "The timeline requires your presence. You have work to do in your own era." Connor blinked. "My own era? You mean—" "I mean the 21st century. Your friends are there, your family, your unfinished business." A ghost of a smile crossed the Colowan's face. "Go home, Connor Kent. The future will remember you." The return was disorienting. One moment he was in the 31st century, surrounded by wonders beyond imagination. The next, he was standing in Smallville, in the field behind the Kent farm, beneath a sky that looked exactly as he remembered. Martha found him an hour later, standing motionless among the cornstalks. She did not scream, she did not faint. She simply walked up to him, took his face in her weathered hands and said, "Welcome home, Connor. I knew you'd find your way back." He broke down in her arms, sobbing like the child he had never truly been. 1,000 years, a death and a resurrection. Battles that spanned the multiverse, and here, in the fields of Kansas, with an old woman who loved him unconditionally, he finally understood what it meant to be alive. The world had moved on during his absence. Tim and Cassie had found comfort in each other, a relationship born of shared grief that neither of them fully understood. The Teen Titans had continued without him, new members filling the roster, old members drifting away. The superhero community had changed in ways subtle and profound. But Connor was back, and this time he intended to stay. In another world, the story began differently. Not in the pages of comic books, but in the frames of animation. Not with the death of Superman, but with the curiosity of sidekicks. Not in a Metropolis laboratory, but in the hidden depths beneath Washington, D.C. The Young Justice animated series reimagined Connor Kent for a new generation, and in doing so, created a version of the character whose journey would become definitive. This was Superboy as he was always meant to be, angry, vulnerable, searching for identity, and destined to find love in the most unexpected of places. This was the Superboy who would travel to Mars. Project Cadmus squatted beneath the nation's capital like a tumour. On the surface, it presented itself as a genetics research facility, cutting-edge science in service of humanity's future. Below ground, the truth was far darker. Cadmus was a factory for living weapons. Its corridors teemed with xenomorphs, creatures engineered for specific purposes, their minds linked through telepathic networks, their wills subsumed beneath the control of their creators. And in the deepest level, suspended in a pod of viscous fluid, waited Subject KR. The clone had been grown in secret, his existence known only to the highest levels of Cadmus leadership. He was designed to be a contingency, a replacement for Superman should the hero ever fall, or a weapon to destroy him should he ever turn against humanity. His DNA was a fusion of Kryptonian and human material, spliced together with techniques that pushed the boundaries of biological science. The human DNA came from Lex Luthor. This fact was hidden even from most Cadmus personnel. Luthor's involvement was a secret within secrets, a contingency within contingencies. If the clone ever learned the truth, if he ever discovered that humanity's greatest villain was encoded in his very cells. But that discovery was years away. For now, Subject KR floated in dreamless suspension, waiting for activation that might never come. Until 3 young heroes decided to investigate a fire. Robin, Kid Flash, and Aqualad were not supposed to be there. The sidekicks had gathered at the Hall of Justice, expecting to be inducted into the Justice League, only to be dismissed with patronizing reassurances that their time would come. Frustrated and eager to prove themselves, they had stumbled onto a mystery, a fire at Cadmus, one that seemed designed to destroy evidence rather than cause harm. They investigated. They discovered the xenomorphs. They followed the trail deeper and deeper underground, past security systems and biological horrors, until they reached the chamber where Subject Carl waited. Robin hacked the pod controls. The fluid drained. And for the first time in his existence, the clone opened his eyes. He did not speak. He did not need to. The rage in his gaze said everything. A fury born of 16 weeks of telepathic programming, of memories implanted without consent, of a life defined entirely by the intentions of others. He was a weapon, and weapons were made to destroy. He attacked. The battle was brutal and one-sided. Subject KR possessed incredible strength and durability, shrugging off attacks that would have felled ordinary opponents. He hurled Aqualad through walls. He caught Kid Flash mid-sprint and slammed him into the ground. He matched Robin blow for blow, outpacing the young detective's every tactical adjustment. But he was not unstoppable, and the 3 sidekicks, working together with the coordination of heroes who had trained alongside legends, managed to reach him, not with force, but with words. "We're not your enemies," Robin shouted, dodging another devastating punch. "Cadmus made you to be a weapon, but you don't have to be what they made you." Something flickered in the clone's eyes. Doubt, confusion, the first kraken, the programming that had defined his entire existence. The xenomorphs intervened before the moment could resolve. Double X, a telepathic creature who had secretly been working against Cadmus from within, used his powers to suppress the clone's rage, buying time for the young heroes to escape with their unexpected ally. They fled into the sunlight, bringing Subject KR with them, and when the Justice League arrived, demanding explanations, the clone stood defiant before the world's greatest heroes, a weapon who had chosen, in that first crucial moment, to be something else. Superman did not know what to do with him. The Man of Steel stood before his clone, his expression unreadable, his thoughts clearly racing. He had faced cosmic threats and dimensional horrors. He had battled gods and monsters. But this, a teenage copy of himself, looking at him with eyes that held equal parts hope and resentment, was something he had no framework to process. He did what he always did when, confronted with the incomprehensible. He retreated into duty. "The League will figure out what to do with you," Superman said, his voice carefully neutral. "In the meantime, you'll stay at the cave with the others." The clone stared at him, waiting, hoping for something more, a word of welcome, an acknowledgement of connection, anything that might suggest he mattered to the hero whose face he wore. Superman turned and walked away. It was Batman who intervened, pulling the Man of Steel aside for a conversation that witnesses described as tense. The Dark Knight understood what Superman did not, that the clone was not a problem to be solved, but a person to be guided. He had raised multiple Robins. He knew what it meant to take responsibility for young lives that had been shaped by trauma. Eventually, reluctantly, Superman would come around. He would visit the clone, attempt awkward conversations, slowly build a relationship that resembled brotherhood. But the damage of that first rejection lingered. The clone would carry it with him for years. In the meantime, he needed a name. The team gave him one. Miss Martian suggested it first. Connor, after a character from a television show she loved. The clone accepted it with a shrug that concealed deeper emotion. Having any name felt like progress. Having a name chosen by someone who seemed to genuinely care about him felt like a gift. Connor Kent. It would serve until something better came along. The Kent part came later when Superman finally acknowledged their connection. Clark introduced Connor to his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, the couple who had raised an alien child as their own and loved him unconditionally. They welcomed Connor with the same warmth they had shown Clark decades earlier. Here at last was a family that did not see him as a weapon or a complication. But before the Kents, before Superman's acceptance, before any of that could happen, there was M'gann. M'gann Moores called herself Miss Martian. She was the niece of John Johns, the Martian Manhunter, sent to Earth to learn about humanity and serve as a hero. She was cheerful and eager, and prone to exclaiming catchphrases from the sitcom that had taught her everything she knew about Earth culture. She baked cookies that were usually inedible. She treated every mission like an adventure, and every teammate like a potential friend, and she was hiding something. On Mars, society was divided by colour. Green Martians held power. Red Martians served as a minority caste, and white Martians, the most numerous, the most despised, were treated as monsters. They were blamed for ancient wars, subjected to systemic discrimination, forced to conceal their true forms if they wished to participate in mainstream society. M'gann was a white Martian. She had not told her teammates. She had not told her uncle, though he certainly suspected. She maintained the appearance of a green Martian at all times, crafted an identity based on the protagonist of her favourite show, and lived in constant terror that her secret would be discovered. Connor noticed that something was off. He could not identify what. His understanding of Martian culture was non-existent, but he sensed the anxiety beneath her cheerfulness, the fear behind her smiles. And because he understood what it meant to be defined by origins you did not choose, he did not push. Instead, he simply stayed. They trained together, fought together, spent long hours in the cave's common areas, watching movies and cooking disastrous meals and slowly, tentatively, learning to trust each other. The psychic link came first. M'gann established mental connections with all her teammates, a Martian custom that facilitated communication during missions. But the link with Connor was different, deeper, more personal. Through it, she could feel his emotions directly. The anger he worked so hard to control, the loneliness he rarely acknowledged, the desperate hope that he might someday be more than what Cadmus had made him. And he could feel hers, the fear, the shame, the love that she tried to hide beneath friendship. They kissed at midnight on New Year's Eve, surrounded by teammates who had seen it coming for months. Their relationship was not uncomplicated. Connor struggled with anger issues that M'gann's telepathy sometimes exacerbated. Her instinct to soothe his emotions through mental contact felt to him like manipulation, a reminder of the xenomorph programming that had controlled him in Cadmus. They fought about boundaries, about trust, about the line between connection and control. And then M'gann crossed that line. During a particularly intense argument, she used her telepathy to alter his memories, erasing the conflict entirely, smoothing over the disagreement as if it had never happened. It was a violation of the deepest kind, and when Connor discovered what she had done, the betrayal nearly destroyed them. He broke up with her. Moved out of the cave. He put distance between them that felt like light years. But love is stubborn, and Connor, despite everything, could not stop loving her. They reconciled slowly, painfully, rebuilding trust through actions rather than words. M'gann confronted her own tendency toward mental manipulation, seeking help from her uncle, working to understand why she had violated the person she loved most. Connor confronted his anger, learning healthier ways to process emotions that had been programmed into him from birth. They were not the same people who had kissed at midnight. They were better, stronger, more honest. And when Connor knelt before her, years later, and asked her to marry him, she said yes without hesitation. The bioship broke through Earth's atmosphere like a living arrow, its organic hull shimmering with bioluminescent patterns as it oriented toward the distant red dot that was their destination. Inside, Connor Kent sat beside M'gann Moores, their fingers intertwined, watching the stars wheel past the translucent walls. Behind them, Garfield Logan, Beast Boy, the green-skinned shapeshifter who called M'gann his sister, sprawled across a seat with the casual disregard for posture that defined him. They were going to Mars, not for a mission, not to fight a villain or prevent a catastrophe. They were going for something far more personal, far more vulnerable. They were going to get married. The engagement had been years in the making. After their reconciliation, after the slow and painful work of rebuilding trust, Connor and McGann had settled into something that felt permanent. They lived together, fought together, built a life together. The team had evolved around them, new members joining, old members moving on. But they remained constants, the heart of what Young Justice had always been. Connor had proposed on a quiet evening in the cave, no audience, no fanfare, just the two of them, as it had always been. McGann had cried. Connor had cried too, though he would deny it if asked. The ring was simple, Kryptonian crystal, shaped by heat vision into something that caught the light like starfire. But marriage on Earth was not enough. McGann wanted to honour her heritage, to celebrate their union on the world where she had been born. She wanted her parents to meet Connor properly, to give their blessing, to welcome him into a family that stretched back generations. She wanted to go home. And so they travelled across the solar system, leaving behind the blue marble that had become Connor's world, journeying toward a red planet that held secrets neither of them fully understood. Mars was dying. Not physically. The planet's atmosphere remained thin but breathable for its inhabitants. Its cities still bustled with life, its civilization still functioned. But socially, politically, the world that had produced McGann was tearing itself apart. The division had always existed. Green Martians controlled the government, the military, the institutions of power. They were the majority, the norm, the standard against which all others were measured. Red Martians occupied a secondary status, respected but marginalized, their smaller numbers limiting their political influence. And White Martians were the lowest caste. Blamed for ancient wars, stigmatized as inherently violent, they were the targets of systemic discrimination that touched every aspect of Martian life. They were denied positions of authority. They were segregated into specific districts. They were expected to hide their true forms, to present themselves as green whenever possible, to be ashamed of the bodies they had been born with. McGann had fled this world partly to escape that shame. On Earth, among humans who could not distinguish green from white, she had found freedom. She had built a life where her origins did not define her, where she could be judged by her actions rather than her pigmentation. Now she was returning, and the Mars she found was worse than the one she had left. King Saturn Jax had been murdered. The assassination had occurred weeks before their arrival, throwing the planet into chaos. Saturn had been a reformer, a red Martian who had somehow risen to the throne and used his position to advocate for equality. He had pushed for policies that would improve the lives of white Martians, that would dismantle the systems of oppression that had defined their society for millennia. He had been controversial, opposed by powerful factions, beloved by the marginalized. And now he was dead. The Queen had assumed power, rolling back many of his reforms. Tensions between the castes had escalated. Protests had turned violent. The world McGann remembered, imperfect but stable, had become a powder keg waiting for a spark. This was the context into which she brought her human fiancé. The reception was mixed. Her parents welcomed Connor with genuine warmth. Janmors and Meatmorers were simple people, farmers essentially, who had raised their many children with love and asked little from the universe beyond peace. They saw how McGann looked at Connor. They felt through the psychic bonds that connected all Martians the depth of her love for him. That was enough. Her sister Emery was more complicated. There was tension between the siblings, old wounds that had never fully healed, resentments that simmered beneath the surface of polite conversation. Emery had stayed on Mars while McGann fled to Earth. She had endured the discrimination, navigated the prejudice, built a life within the constraints of a society that despised her. Watching her younger sister return with an alien fiancé, treated as a hero by humans who had never had to hide their true nature, it was difficult for both of them. And beyond the family, the broader Martian population was openly hostile. A white Martian marrying an Earthling, it was unprecedented, scandalous. Betrayal of everything the conservative factions believed about purity and tradition. Connor felt the weight of their disapproval pressing against his mind, a constant low-level telepathic hum of disdain that he could not fully block. But he had faced worse. He had been called a weapon, A fake. A monster. Disapproving in-laws were manageable. What concerned him more was the murder mystery. They were not supposed to get involved. This was meant to be a wedding trip, a celebration, a brief escape from the endless responsibilities of heroism. But Connor had been a hero too long to ignore injustice when it presented itself, and the murder of King Stern was clearly not what it seemed. He began asking questions, quietly at first, then more openly. He spoke with witnesses, examined crime scenes, applied the investigative techniques he had learned from years of working alongside detectives and spies. McGann helped, her telepathy cutting through lies and evasions that would have stymied ordinary investigators. What they discovered was troubling. The official story blamed white Martian terrorists, convenient scapegoats for a society that already viewed them as inherently criminal. But the evidence did not support this narrative. The murder had been too precise, too well planned, too strategically timed. This was not the work of desperate extremists. This was an assassination orchestrated by someone with access, resources, and a sophisticated understanding of Martian politics, and at the edges of their investigation, a name kept surfacing: Macomb Moores, McGann's brother, a white Martian who had rejected the path of assimilation and chosen instead to fight. He had become a terrorist, or a freedom fighter depending on perspective, waging a violent campaign against the systems that oppressed his people. He had killed, he had destroyed, he had made himself an enemy of the state, and he had made a deal with Apocalypse, the Shadows watched. Connor did not know. It could not know it. But he was not the only one investigating. 3 figures from the 31st century had travelled back in time, their presence carefully concealed, their mission desperately urgent. Saturn Girl, Phantom Girl, Chameleon Boy. They were Legionnaires, members of the same team that had resurrected Connor in another timeline, another continuity. But here, in this animated universe, their purpose was different. They had come to prevent a tragedy. They had come to protect Superboy from a fate that history recorded as inevitable. Lor-Zod was hunting him. The son of General Dru-Zod, the Kryptonian tyrant who had been imprisoned in the Phantom Zone for crimes against his own people, had travelled through time with a singular purpose. He intended to free his father, and somehow Superboy was central to that plan. The Legionnaires did not fully understand the connection. The historical records were fragmentary, corrupted by temporal interference, but they knew that Connor Kent was in danger. They knew that Mars would be the site of something terrible, and they had positioned themselves to intervene, if they could, if they were not too late. The pre-wedding rituals began 3 days before the ceremony. Ma'ayavana, the Martians called it, the blessing of bonding. A psychic ritual that would intertwine Connor and McGann's minds in ways that transcended ordinary telepathic connection. They would become, in a very real sense, one consciousness housed in 2 bodies. For a Kryptonian, even a half-Kryptonian clone, this was an extraordinary gift. Connor had always felt isolated, his mind a fortress that even McGann's telepathy could not fully penetrate. The idea of true mental union was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They underwent the ritual together, guided by an ancient priestess whose age was measured in centuries. The sensation was indescribable, McGann's thoughts flowing into his emotions reflected back through her. Perception. For a moment he understood everything she had ever felt, every fear, every joy, every moment of shame and triumph, and she understood him. The anger, the loneliness, the desperate, clawing need to be seen as real. When the ritual ended, they looked at each other with new eyes. "I love you," Connor said. The words felt inadequate, but they were what he had. McGann smiled, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "I know, I've always known, but it's nice to hear." 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until they would stand before her family, before her world, and declare their commitment to each other. 3 days until the bomb. Macomb had made his preparations. The gene bomb was apocalyptic technology, a weapon of unimaginable cruelty, designed not merely to kill, but to eradicate. It was engineered to target specific genetic markers, to destroy every individual who possessed them while leaving others unharmed. In this case, the targets were green Martians. Every green Martian on the planet. Millions of souls, marked for extinction. He planned to detonate it during Prince Jem's birthday celebration, a public event that would draw crowds from across Mars, that would concentrate his enemies in one place, that would maximize the horror of his vengeance. He believed he was righteous. He believed that generations of oppression justified any response, that the suffering of his people demanded blood payment from their oppressors. He had convinced himself that genocide was justice, and in the Colosseum, as the celebration began, the clock counted down towards 0. The Colosseum roared with celebration. Thousands of Martians had gathered to honor Prince Jem Jax, the young heir who represented hope for reconciliation, whose public support for equality had made him beloved by the marginalized castes. Green Martians mingled with red. Even a handful of white Martians had been permitted entry, their presence a symbol of the reforms that Jem championed. Connor stood near the royal box, uncomfortable in ceremonial robes that McGann had insisted he wear. The telepathic hum of the crowd pressed against his mind. Joy and excitement and political calculation, all swirling together in a cacophony that he could not fully tune out. He was learning to navigate Martian mental spaces, but it remained exhausting. McGann squeezed his hand, her smile bright despite the tensions that had shadowed their visit. "Just a few more hours of diplomacy," she promised. "Then we can escape to somewhere quiet." He managed to smile in return. Define quiet. Because on this planet nothing ever seems... The thought died unfinished. Deep beneath the Colosseum, in the maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the ancient structure, Connor felt something wrong. His tactile telekinesis extended beyond his body in moments of stress, and now it was screaming at him, a vibration in the stone, a hum of technology that did not belong. "McGann," he said, his voice suddenly flat. "There's something below us." Her eyes widened. Through their psychic link she caught fragments of what he was sensing. Fear flooded across the connection. Not her fear, but his, amplified and reflected. Connor. Wait. But he was already moving. Punching through the floor of the Colosseum, descending into darkness, following the wrongness to its source. The bomb was beautiful in its horror. Apocalyptian engineering gleamed with malevolent precision, a cylinder of dark metal wrapped in circuitry that pulsed with sickly light. Connor recognized the technology from briefings, from battles, from nightmares. This was not merely a weapon. This was a genocide engine. Gene bomb, designed to target specific genetic markers, calibrated for green Martians. The countdown display showed less than 60 seconds. Connor's mind raced through options. He could not disarm it. He had neither the knowledge nor the time. He could not contain the blast. The weapon was too powerful, its radius too vast. He could not evacuate the Colosseum. 60 seconds was not enough to save thousands of panicking civilians. There was only one choice. He wrapped his arms around the cylinder, feeling the vibration of imminent detonation resonating through his bones. He channeled every ounce of his tactile telekinesis into his legs, into his core, into the desperate thrust that drove him downward. Through rock, through magma channels, through layers of Martian geology that had formed over billions of years. The bomb's countdown reached 0 just as Connor breached the planet's liquid core. The explosion was unlike anything he had experienced. Apocalyptian energy merged with volcanic fury, creating a conflagration that existed beyond conventional physics. The heat was absolute, not mere temperature, but a fundamental force that sought to unmake matter at the molecular level. Connor's body, durable as it was, began to fail. His skin blistered, his cells screamed. But the bomb's genetic targeting had been disrupted. The magma absorbed and scattered the payload, rendering it harmless to the Martians above. The gene bomb had claimed only one victim, him. In the Colosseum, McGann felt their psychic link shatter. It was not a fading, it was not a gentle dissolution. It was amputation, sudden, brutal, complete. One moment, Connor's presence filled the corner of her mind that had been his for years. The next, there was nothing. A void where he had been. An absence that screamed louder than any sound. She fell to her knees, her telepathic cry rippling across the planet. Every Martian in the Colosseum clutched their heads. Some collapsed. Others wept without understanding why. The grief was too vast to contain, too primal to suppress. Superboy was gone. But death is not always final. In the instant before the explosion consumed him, something happened. A hand reached through dimensions, a hand belonging to Phantom Girl, the Legionnaire who had been watching from the shadows. She had seen the tragedy unfolding. She had known from fractured historical records that this was the moment she was meant to prevent. She reached for Connor, intending to phase him to her home dimension of BGZTL. Her powers allowed her to become intangible, to slip between realities, to pull others along with her. If she could grab him before the blast reached full intensity, the explosion interfered. The energies of Apocalypse warped her powers, twisted her trajectory. Instead of BGZTL, she and Connor were hurled into a dimension between dimensions, a realm that existed outside normal space-time, a prison designed to hold the universe's most dangerous criminals, the Phantom Zone. Connor opened his eyes to nothing. Not darkness. Darkness implied the absence of light, which implied that light was possible. This was something else. A grey void that stretched in every direction without feature or landmark. He floated in it or stood on it or both. The concepts of up and down had lost meaning. His body ached. The burns from the explosion had not healed. In this place, he realized slowly, there was no yellow sun to fuel his recovery. His Kryptonian cells were starving, his hybrid physiology struggling to maintain itself without the solar radiation it required. And he was alone. Number. Not alone. He found Phantom Girl drifting nearby, her body limp, her eyes closed. She was alive. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, but unconscious. Comatose. Whatever the dimensional transit had done to him, it had done worse to her. Connor gathered her in his arms, cradling her weightless form. He had no idea where they were, no idea how to escape, no idea if escape was even possible. But he could not simply float here and wait for death. He began to move. The Phantom Zone was not empty. As Connor travelled, walking on surfaces that did not exist, climbing structures that materialized from nothing, he began to perceive the dimension's inhabitants. They were shadows at first, half-glimpsed movements at the edge of his vision. Then they became more distinct. Figures in ragged clothing, faces twisted by madness, eyes that tracked him with predatory hunger. These were the Zone's prisoners, criminals from across the galaxy, exiled here by Kryptonian justice, left to drift for eternity in this dimensionless hell. Some had been here for centuries. Some had lost all trace of their original identities, becoming something less than sentient, and some had organized. Connor learned to avoid the roving bands, groups of prisoners who hunted the Zone for newcomers, seeking victims to dominate or consume. His powers functioned erratically here. The tactile telekinesis flickered in and out, strong one moment and non-existent the next. His strength was diminished but present. His senses extended further than they should, as if the absence of normal space allowed perception to stretch. But the greatest threat was not the prisoners. It was the Devourers. They came from nowhere, massive creatures vaguely serpentine, their forms composed of shadow and hunger. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply hunted, drawn by emotions, by psychic residue, by the spiritual signatures of conscious beings. Connor had been taught in Cadmus to suppress his emotions. That programming had been imperfect, had left him with the anger issues that had plagued him throughout his life. But now, for the first time, he understood why the programming had been installed. The Devourers were drawn to rage. His rage. The first attack nearly killed him. He fought back with everything he had, fists and telekinesis, and the desperate fury of a man who refused to die. The Devourer absorbed every blow, grew stronger with every burst of anger, matched his escalation with its own. He only survived because he remembered McGann. Not consciously, there was no time for conscious thought, but somewhere in the depths of his psyche, her face surfaced. Her smile, her warmth, the love that had sustained him through so many crises. His rage subsided. The Devourer hesitated, confused by the sudden absence of the emotion it had been feeding on. And in that moment of hesitation, Connor fled. He learned. Slowly, painfully, through repeated near-death experiences. The Devourers could not track what they could not sense. If he maintained calm, if he suppressed the anger that had always defined him, he became invisible to them. It was, he realized bitterly, exactly what Cadmus had wanted. The programming they had tried to install, the emotional suppression, the controlled responses, would have made him perfect for survival in this place. He practiced, he meditated, he visualized being married to M'gann, imagined the life they would have built, held on to love as a shield against the darkness. It worked. For a time. Zone sickness came for everyone eventually. The Phantom Zone was not merely a prison, it was a torture device, a realm specifically designed to break the minds of its inhabitants. Time moved strangely here, impossible to track. Isolation pressed against the psyche like a physical weight. The absence of sensation, of change, of hope, it accumulated day after impossible day until even the strongest wills began to crack. Connor held out longer than most. His training with the team, his years of heroism, his connection to M'gann through memories if not through their severed link, all of it provided anchors that kept him grounded. But the anchors were not enough. Months passed, perhaps years. He could not tell. Phantom Girl remained comatose, her condition unchanging. The Devourers circled, waiting for his control to slip. The other prisoners watched from the shadows, calculating whether he was worth the risk of confrontation, and Connor began to forget who he was. It started with small things. He could not remember the colour of M'gann's eyes in her natural form. He could not recall the taste of Martha Kent's cooking. He struggled to visualize Titan's tower, the cave, the places that had been his home. Then the larger things slipped away. His friends' faces blurred. His own history became fragmentary, isolated moments without context, emotions without causes. He knew he had been a hero once, but he could not remember what that meant. The darkness whispered to him, told him he was a monster, told him he had always been a monster, a weapon designed to destroy, briefly deluded into believing himself something more, told him that M'gann had never loved him, that his friends had only tolerated him, that his entire existence was a mistake that the universe was now correcting. He stopped fighting the whispers. It was easier to agree. General Druzod found him at his lowest point. The Kryptonian tyrant had been imprisoned in the Phantom Zone for crimes against his own people. Attempts to overthrow the government of Krypton to impose military rule to remake society in his image. He had been here far longer than Connor, had built a following among the other prisoners, had established something resembling order in this orderless place, and he recognized what Connor was, half Kryptonian, clone, weapon. "You have been abandoned," Zod said, his voice carrying the authority of a general who had commanded armies. "The heroes of Earth left you here to rot. They have moved on. They have forgotten you." Connor wanted to argue. But the zone sickness had eaten his certainty, and Zod's words echoed the whispers he had already accepted. "You were created to serve," Zod continued, "to obey. That is not a flaw, it is a purpose, a clarity that the chaos of heroism could never provide." He extended his hand. "Join me. Accept the programming that was always your destiny, and when we escape this prison, you will have a place at my side." Connor looked at the hand. He remembered dimly that he should refuse, that something about this was wrong, but he could not remember why. He took Zod's hand. M'gann Mors had forgotten how to breathe. Not literally. Her Martian physiology continued its autonomous functions, drawing atmosphere through membranes that required no conscious effort. But the rhythm of living, the unconscious ease of existence had abandoned her the moment the psychic link shattered. She returned to Earth hollow. The journey from Mars passed in a blur of disconnected moments. Emery sat beside her, alternating between awkward comfort and deliberate provocation, trying anything to pierce the shell of grief that had enclosed her sister. John Johns piloted the ship in silence, his ancient eyes holding sorrows that he chose not to articulate. Beast Boy curled in a corner, his green skin pale, his usual energy extinguished. They had left without a body. There was no body to recover, only ash and magma, and the fading echoes of a hero's sacrifice. When they landed, when M'gann stepped onto Earth for the first time since departing for her wedding, she felt nothing. The planet that had become her home was simply geography now, meaningless shapes and colours, lacking the presence that had made them significant. Connor was gone, and without him, nothing mattered. The weeks that followed were a descent. M'gann withdrew from the team, from the League, from everyone who tried to reach her. She locked herself in her quarters, surrounded by Connor's belongings, his shirt still carrying traces of his scent, his book still marked at pages he had meant to return to. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She simply existed, waiting for the pain to either consume her or transform into something bearable. Her brother Macomb had been blamed for the attack. The gene bomb was apocalyptic technology, and Macomb had been known to deal with apocalypse. The Justice League investigated, searching for evidence that would confirm his responsibility. McGann confronted him herself. She found him in the ruins of one of his hideouts, surrounded by followers who scattered at her approach. Her telepathy pressed against his mind with force that bordered on violence. She wanted answers, wanted someone to blame, wanted a target for the grief that was drowning her. But Macomb did not know about the kryptonite. The bomb had contained kryptonite radiation, a detail that McGann had not previously understood. The element was lethal to Kryptonians, which meant it was lethal to half-Kryptonians as well. Someone had specifically designed the weapon to kill Connor, not just the Green Martians. Someone who understood his physiology. Macomb had no such knowledge. His involvement with Apocalypse was limited to acquiring technology, not to engineering its specifics. The kryptonite had been added by someone else, someone with access to information about Superboy's weaknesses. McGann left her brother alive, though part of her had wanted otherwise. She returned to Earth with more questions than answers, with no one to hold responsible for her. Loss. The investigation reached a dead end. The Justice League ran out of leads, and McGann sank deeper into despair, convinced that she would spend the rest of her centuries-long lifespan mourning a man she could not avenge. Until Zatanna had her vision. The sorceress had been experimenting with new forms of divination. Zatanna Zatara was one of Earth's most powerful magic users, the daughter of a legendary magician, trained in arts that predated human civilization. She had known Connor for years, had fought beside him, had mourned him alongside the rest of the heroic community. And now, in the depths of a trance, she saw something impossible. Shadows. A grey void stretching endlessly. A figure floating in the emptiness, his form indistinct but recognizable, and around him other shapes, prisoners, monsters, the accumulated refuse of Kryptonian justice, the phantom zone. She broke from the trance gasping, her heart hammering. The vision had been fragmentary, uncertain. It might have been wishful thinking, her unconscious mind constructing comfort from grief. But something in the images felt real, felt present, rather than memorial. She brought her findings to the Justice League. The response was immediate. Batman analysed her vision with characteristic skepticism, searching for alternative explanations. Superman listened with hope he struggled to suppress, hope that his brother might somehow have survived. Martian Manhunter confirmed that the Phantom Zone was theoretically accessible from Mars, that the dimensional barriers there were thinner than on Earth, and McGann felt something stir beneath the numbness. A spark, a possibility, the faintest tremor of hope in a landscape that had been barren. "We find him," she said, her voice hoarse from weeks of silence. "Whatever it takes, we find him and we bring him home." The rescue operation began. Phantom Girl woke in fire. The Legionnaire's eyes snapped open to find herself surrounded by Zods. Followers, Kryptonian criminals who had made the General their leader, who served him with fanatic devotion. She was in their camp, laid out on a stone slab, her body weak from months of coma. But her mind was sharp, and she remembered everything. She remembered reaching for Superboy as the bomb detonated, remembered the dimensional displacement that had hurled them into the zone instead of BGZTL, remembered drifting unconscious while the boy she'd tried to save struggled alone against horrors she could not help him face. And she remembered her mission. The Legion had sent her to prevent a tragedy. Historical records indicated that Superboy would die on Mars, that his death would trigger a chain of events leading to catastrophe. She had failed to prevent the death, but perhaps she could still prevent the catastrophe. If she could escape, if she could warn the others, if she could find a way home. She feigned continued unconsciousness, listening as Zod's followers discussed their plans. They spoke of Lord Zod, the General's son, who was working in the present day to free his father from the Phantom Zone. They spoke of a Phantom Zone projector, of the cosmic treadmill, of schemes that spanned centuries, and they spoke of Superboy. The clone had become Zod's most devoted soldier. His programming, the Cadmus conditioning that had never been fully erased, had been reactivated, his will subsumed beneath commands that he no longer had the strength to resist. He believed everything Zod told him. He obeyed without question. When Phantom Girl finally revealed herself to him, hoping to remind him of who he truly was, he listened carefully. And then he reported every word to General Zod. The betrayal was complete. Ursa, Zod's wife, as ruthless as her husband, demanded Phantom Girl's immediate execution. The Legionnaire was a threat, a potential escape route, a connection to forces that might oppose Zod's eventual return to power. Eliminating her was simple prudence. Phantom Girl had no choice but to flee. She activated her powers in a burst of desperate energy, phasing out of the Phantom Zone and back toward her home dimension. But the transit was imperfect. Her hand burned from contact with the dimensional barriers, her ring damaged, her strength depleted. She emerged not on Bixtail but inside the core of Mars, trapped in magma that had nearly killed Superboy months before. She survived. Barely. But she was in no condition to continue the rescue on her own. The message reached Earth through means that historians would later struggle to explain. Saturn Girl and Chameleon Boy, her fellow Legionnaires, still operating in the shadows, pieced together her location and relayed information to the Justice League. Superboy was alive. He was in the Phantom Zone, he was under Zod's control, and Zod was preparing to escape. The final battle erupted in Metropolis. Lor-Zod had succeeded. Using a combination of apocalyptic technology and the cosmic treadmill, a device that allowed travel through time and dimensions, he had opened a portal to the Phantom Zone. General Zod emerged into Earth's sunlight for the first time in decades, his Kryptonian cells drinking in power that had been denied him for so long, and beside him stood Superboy. Connor's eyes were empty. His movements were mechanical, precise, stripped of the personality that had defined him. He wore the armor of Zod's forces, carried weapons designed to kill superheroes, followed orders with the efficiency of the weapon Cadmus had always intended him to be. When Superman confronted him, Connor attacked without hesitation. The battle between the Man of Steel and his corrupted brother shook the foundations of the city. Buildings crumbled, streets cracked. Civilians fled in terror from a conflict that exceeded anything they had witnessed before. And through it all, Megan Moores searched for a way to reach her fiancé. She found him in the wreckage of a collapsed building. Connor stood over Superman's battered form, his fist raised for a killing blow, his expression utterly blank. The programming had erased everything, his memories, his emotions, his very identity. He was Subject KR again, a weapon awaiting orders. "Connor," McGann said. He turned. His eyes passed over her without recognition. "Stay away from me," he said, and there was fear in his voice now, fear that the programming could not fully suppress. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't," McGann replied. She stepped closer, ignoring the danger, ignoring the voice in her head that screamed warnings. "You could never hurt me." "You don't know what I am." His fist trembled. "You don't know what they made me." "I know exactly what you are." She reached out, her hand touching his face. "You are Connor Kent, Connell of the House of El, the man I love, the man I was going to marry." The psychic link, dormant since the explosion, severed by dimensional displacement, flickered back to life. McGann poured everything through that connection. Memories, emotions, the complete history of their relationship from the first awkward meetings in the cave to the moment he proposed. She showed him who he was before Cadmus, before Zod, before the programming that had tried to erase his soul. She showed him the truth. Connor screamed. The programming shattered like glass, the false identity Zod had constructed collapsing under the weight of everything McGann gave him. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to cry. "McGann," he gasped. "McGann, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't—" "Shh." She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around him. "You're home now. You're safe." Behind them, Superman rose. The Man of Steel looked at his brother with eyes that held no condemnation, only relief, only love. "Together," Superman said. "Like it was always supposed to be." Connor looked up, met his mentor's gaze, and nodded. They faced. Zod as family. And when the battle ended, when the general was defeated, when the Phantom Zone projector was destroyed, When the immediate threat was neutralized, Connor Kent stood in the sunlight of Earth, surrounded by heroes who had never stopped believing in him. He was finally home. The ceremony took place at sunset. Not on Mars. That world still bore too many scars, too many painful memories. Not in Metropolis or Gotham or any of the cities where they had fought and bled and nearly died. They chose instead a place that meant something quieter, something more personal. The Kent farm in Smallville, Kansas. The fields stretched golden toward the horizon, corn standing tall in the August warmth. The old farmhouse watched from its hill, its white paint weathered by decades of prairie wind. And in the yard where Clark Kent had once learned to fly, where Connor had found his first true home, two people prepared to become one. M'gann wore white, not the traditional Martian. Ceremonial robes, she had considered them, had almost chosen them out of a sense of obligation to her heritage. But in the end she wanted something simpler, something that reflected who she had become rather than where she had come from. The dress was earth-made, designed by a friend who understood that some moments transcended fashion. It flowed like water when she moved, catching the late afternoon light in ways that seemed almost magical. Her green skin glowed beneath the fabric. Her red hair, the hair she had chosen for herself, modelled after a sitcom character who had taught her what humans could be, fell in waves past her shoulders. She had never felt more beautiful. And when she saw Connor's face as she walked toward him, she knew he agreed. Connor wore the S-shield, not on a costume. He had retired the black t-shirt for the occasion, replacing it with a simple dark suit that Martha Kent had helped him select. But the cufflinks at his wrists bore the symbol of the house, of L, and beneath his shirt, against his heart, hung the Kryptonian crystal that marked him as Con-El. He was, for the first time he could remember, not afraid. The fear had been his constant companion since consciousness first flickered in his eyes. Fear of inadequacy, fear of the darkness in his DNA, fear that he would never be real, never be worthy, never be more than what Cadmus had designed. Even in his happiest moments, the fear had whispered in the background, reminding him that everything good could be taken away. Now, watching M'gann approach through the golden light, he felt that fear dissolve. Whatever came next, whatever enemies arose, whatever crises threatened, whatever challenges the universe threw at them, they would face it together. That was enough. That had always been enough. The guests filled the yard. Superman stood as Connor's best man, his presence a statement of the family they had become. Tim Drake sat in the front row, his complicated feelings about Connor's resurrection finally resolved into simple happiness for his friend. Cassie Sandsmark was there too, Wonder Girl, who had loved Connor once, who had mourned him, who had found her own path in his absence. She smiled at the couple with genuine warmth. Old wounds finally healed. The team attended in force. Nightwing and Artemis, Kaldor and Zatanna, Beast Boy still in his ceremonial robes from the Martian rituals they had never completed. The Justice League sent representatives, Batman watching from the shadows as he always did, Wonder Woman radiant in the afternoon sun. Even heroes from other eras appeared, legionnaires who had travelled through time to witness the wedding they had fought to make possible. And Martha Kent, silver-haired and smiling, sat in the place of honour usually reserved for the mother of the groom. She had no biological connection to either Connor or M'gann, but she had opened her home to both of them, had loved them when they needed love most, had given them the foundation on which they had built their lives. Family, she had taught them, was not about blood. It was about choice. John Johns performed the ceremony. The Martian Manhunter stood before his niece and the boy who had become like a nephew to him, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. He spoke in both English and Martian, honouring both worlds that had shaped the couple. He spoke of love and loss, of hope and perseverance, of the bonds that transcended species and origin. "You have been tested," he said, his red eyes moving between them. "Tested by enemies and by circumstance. Tested by your own fears and doubts. You have been separated by death and dimension, by manipulation and despair. And yet you stand here, together, your bond unbroken." He paused, letting the words settle over the assembly. This is the nature of true love, not the absence of obstacles, but the choice to overcome them. Not perfection, but commitment. You have chosen each other, again and again, in the face of everything that sought to tear you apart. M'gann's hand tightened in Connor's. Through their restored psychic link, he felt her emotions, joy and relief, and a love so vast it defied articulation. Do you, McGann Moores, take this man as your husband, to stand beside him through whatever trials await, to support him in darkness and celebrate with him in light, to be his partner in all things until the end of your days? I do, McGann said, and her voice did not waver. And do you, Connell of the House of El, take this woman as your wife, to protect her not from challenge but through it, to honour her strength as she honours yours, to build with her a life that neither of you could have imagined alone? Connor looked at McGann, at the woman who had seen past his anger to the loneliness beneath, who had loved him when he could not love himself, who had fought across dimensions to bring him home. I do, he said. They kissed as the sun touched the horizon. The light painted them gold and amber, transforming the moment into something that seemed to belong to legend rather than life. The guests applauded. Someone, probably Beast Boy, whistled loudly, and Connor Kent held his wife in his arms, feeling the weight of everything they had survived and the lightness of everything that lay ahead. He had been created as a weapon. He had been designed to replace a god. He had carried the DNA of humanity's greatest villain, had died and been resurrected, had lost himself in dimensional prisons and found himself again through love. And now he was a husband, a hero, a man, not because of his origins, not despite them, but through the choices he had made, the relationships he had built, the person he had decided to become. McGann pulled back from the kiss, her forehead resting against his. "Hello, husband," she whispered. Connor smiled, a real smile, unguarded and pure. "Hello, wife." Some heroes are born, some are made. Connor Kent was both and neither. He was a copy who had become an original, a weapon who had become a protector, a boy without a name who had earned dozens of them, Superboy, Connell, Connor, beloved brother, friend.